Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Good morning. A young, beautiful girl entered the office with a hip gait. The whole space was immediately filled with the scent of her fresh citrus perfume and her long silk hair. A waterfall was building down her back. She flipped her curls gracefully to the side, adjusting her short, dark green dress. "You were expecting me." "Well, ladies come through." The young man looked up blankly. With one hand, he corrected the edge of the collar, shirt. The other pointed to the small partition. "Undress. Lie down on the couch." The girl sparkled her eyes playfully. Just like that, at once she giggled, twisting a lock of hair with her finger. "Well, since you insist." The man raised one eyebrow at the lady. "How could it be otherwise? I can give you a massage." He shook his head dismissively. "Pass. Rather not be delayed." "Yes." The girl rolled her eyes and walked behind the thing. Does he really not realize what an idiot he is? She lamented to herself. Maybe he's just pretending. Lucy was a regular client of this masseur. The man was a private practitioner, that is, he was self-employed. He rented a small studio by himself, from which he set up a private massage parlor, where he was the only employee. Lucy sometimes scolded herself for coming to the sessions too often. The pleasure was too expensive. However, she could not give up this business. Nick, is the name of the masseur, was not only a good specialist, but also an insanely handsome man. He is tall and clean-shaven, thick brown, and his hair was slightly tousled. Bright green eyes transmitted in the sun. Lucy often felt that by looking into them, she was magically transported into a lush green forest. And what kind of hands did he have? Strong, beautiful, neat, and at the same time incredibly masculine. Lucy loved not only getting a massage from those hands, she loved just looking at them. Dainty wrists, long fingers, always neat nails. Not a man, a dream. As you can guess, Lucy was head over heels in love with her masseur. Night she dreamed of those strong hands squeezing her in the quiet of her bedroom, of Nick getting greedily drunk with hot kisses on her thin and fair skin. Alas, these were only the dreams and fantasies of a young girl with a rich imagination. Lucy had always been strikingly beautiful and charming. She had never needed male attention. What was her surprise when she discovered that not everyone was head over heels for her beauty? To be more accurate, it was Nick who didn't lose his head. No matter how hard she pouted, no matter how much makeup she put on, it was all for nothing. Nick looked at her the same way he looked out the window or in his notebook, the same way he looked at his watch, guessed the time, the same way he looked at his cell phone screen. He looked at her without a drop of interest, without a hint of any attraction on his part. Maybe he thought to himself, Lucy, grasping her forehead in amazement. A hunch struck her in the heart. What if he likes men? With longing thought the girl Olia, in her hands already removed her dress. "Lucy, you're all right." Nick's slightly agitated voice was heard. Probably the girl had spent a long time in the locker room. Buried in her own thoughts, she had completely lost track of time, which made her masseur a little nervous. "Do you feel bad?" he asked. No, Lucy replied. Spreading her shoulders, she was pulled from the disposable robe, but abruptly stopped her hand halfway. It's now or never. The girl thought to herself and made the decision to go out to the man completely naked. Well, if he's into boys, I'll know it right away, Lucy thought, and after examining her body from head to toe, she took a confident step out of the partition. Nick stood with his back to her. He spread the fingers of his hands and never turned around to look at his client. "Please lie down," badly hiding his displeasure, he said. "I have clients after you. Don't waste your time, please." Lucy, still completely naked, felt more stupid than ever. In her head, this performance looked completely different. The girl was waiting for the subject of her breath. Well, at least look in her direction. She cleared her throat. Nick, no longer hiding his irritation, barked at her. The man turned around sharply and, embarrassed, turned away again. "Lucy, you forgot to put on your robe," Nick hissed coldly. "What's the matter with you today?" Lucy rolled her eyes again, but now, she thought, so hard that she could see herself from the inside out. "Look at me," shouted the offended girl in utter despair. "Are you naked?" replied Nick Obvious. "You know the customers wear a robe when they come out. What else?" The man did not have time to finish. Neat footsteps were heard behind him. Lucy approached him with her whole body, pressing against the man. The man frightenedly sensed so, and did not want to look at his clientele. "What's the matter?" she asked irritably. "Don't you like me?" "No," Nick exclaimed confidently. "Are you my client?" "So what? You're your own boss," parried the girl, slowly approaching the man as a hunter approaches his prey. "Sneakily quiet, but at least look at me already." Nick didn't think of giving up. He continued to move around the office, having no desire to look at or even touch his client. Lucy put it on immediately angrily. He reprimanded her. Trying to reason with her, "Are you one of those?" "Yes," quietly asked Lucy, having already abandoned any attempt to get closer. "I won't tell anyone." Nick froze, then slowly turned around. Hope settled in the girl's chest. "I think he's got it," she thought. When their gazes crossed, Lucy squared her shoulders confidently and smiled predatorily. "How do you like me?" she asked. For a few seconds, the master stared at the girl uninterruptedly, then finally answered, looking the client directly in the eyes. "Nothing, Lucy." "You are completely indifferent to me," he said rudely and quickly went towards the locker room, grabbing a disposable robe and stepping out from behind the partition. He threw the robe at the all-long girl. "Get dressed. You're definitely one of those." Affirmatively stretched out Lucy and reluctantly pulled the robe over herself. "How much time do I have left for the massage?" "No, not one of those," answered Nick. "I'm married." "Lucy, married?" Lucy's eyes rounded in surprise. "So what?" she asked. Tied the thin belt of his robe around himself. Lucy really didn't understand how the fact that the man she liked was already married could interfere with their future relationship. She'd had far more than one married lover in her entire life. None of them had ever been embarrassed by the presence of a spouse. The girl's eyes lit up again. She stepped forward, "And we won't tell her." "No," shouted Nick. "I only love my wife, and I only like her. Get your hands off me," he bellowed. Lucy abruptly stopped coquettishly, and the light went out, and instead a veritable fire of rage lit up. She became more than a little furious and shouted, "Fuck you." She went back to the dressing room and put on her dress and jumped out of the office in a hurry. "Will you regret it?" she shouted one last time and disappeared out the door. The man said quietly. He looked around the room wistfully, then ruffled his thick hair and thought. Lucy was one of Nick's main customers. Be that as it may, Nick didn't want to lose a regular customer. Yes, and Lucy was quite a nice girl, quiet, neat, clean. She was always satisfied with the massage she received, and even often left a few bills in addition for tea. As the girl herself said, of course, to lose such a client did not want to. But what was the right thing to do? Nick was lost in his own thoughts. Nick had always been a good, decent man. The man knew about the fact that nature awarded him with incredible and enchanting beauty since early childhood. His family, relatives, friends of his parents all, and always did not forget, reminding the child just how beautiful he was. Nick's mother even wanted to send her son into modeling. But the boy's father was categorically against it. "This is not a man's business," he said. Nick himself in his beauty has never seen anything positive. There are not many beautiful people in this world. So what? His father gave him a harsh upbringing, built on the fact that a man is first and foremost a provider, and beauty is for women. A man should be a little prettier than a monkey. Nick grew up and became more and more attractive, and other people paid more and more attention to him. Nick himself never noticed it. Even when, at the age of 18, Nick was invited to the casting of a famous TV series, he refused. He knew for sure that his father would be categorically against it. Dad was a real authority for Nick. He was for him an example of his teacher, mentor. Mom, in turn, did not give up trying to instruct her son on a different path. Secretly from his father, she continued to insist that Nick began to monetize his appearance. She picked up castings, ordered photo shoots, dreamed that her son entered the acting school, but all in vain. The only authority for the boy remained his father. Nick followed him through life, confidently, without lowering his gaze and all his values he adopted from his father. People around him were often surprised when they learned that Nick was into hunting and fishing, not yoga or fashion. His appearance didn't match with such hobbies. Seeing a guy with plump lips and thick, long eyelashes, people thought he was a model rather than a hunter. Nick Rose was growing manly stronger. He was still incredibly handsome, but the teenage tenderness had been superseded by a rough, masculine beauty. On his father's advice, Nick enrolled in a sports college, a real man's profession. After successfully entering the university, his father set his son's next goal to marry a good, decent girl. Of course, Nick had a lot of admirers, but so far it was all wrong. The father expressed clear criteria for the future daughter-in-law: educated, pretty, modest. Nick never gave up trying to find his soulmate. But nothing. All the girls that appeared on the way of this handsome man, he did not suit him at all. Nick went to school, got a job. He got older and wiser, but no suitable bride appeared on the horizon. Nick's father sounded the alarm. It was time to nurse his grandchildren, and his son didn't have a wife, not even a girlfriend. A terrible event happened when Nick was 25 years old. His father was gone. The man was accidentally shot during a hunting trip. How terrible is it to be killed by your own friend? After learning of his father's death, Nick fell into a terrible depression. His father was everything to him, but literally everything. And just like that, he was gone so abruptly overnight. It was truly frightening for the young man. How would he be without his father now? That day, when the older man went hunting, Nick was supposed to go with him, but he couldn't because of work. The guy was a professional boxer on top of that, and he had an important fight that day. After hearing about the tragedy, Nick started drinking. As a consequence, he got a leg injury when he got up in one of the bars with the same drunkard. Because of the injury, his career was over, and his passion for hunting was forgotten forever. After his father's death, Nick promised himself never to pick up a gun again in his life. Life was going downhill. None of his friends or family could control the unhappy and lost man. Spitting on everyone, he continued to drink. One cold winter day, Nick, drunk to pieces, lay in the street, not far from the bar where he had surrendered before. He was already used to such a life. After all, every day was similar to the previous one. At first, Nick woke up in a terrible state of hangover tormented him, leaving no chance to recover to normal life. If Nick woke up at home, it was already a big victory. After all, he could often find himself in very questionable places after waking up. Nick had the next goal was to find money for his future life, and of course, the soonest possible. If friends Nick has no friends left, his former colleagues had long ago dissociated themselves from him. And his job, of course, was not. Therefore, there was only one option: generous mom Nina. Nick's mother, even though she realized that he would drink all the money he received from her, she couldn't refuse her beloved only son. He looked ingratiatingly into her eyes, swore that he would never touch alcohol again. And he needed the money to get a new job. He begged, sometimes he cried. Basically, it was the same thing every day. And the woman, unable to bear it, gave her son the money. He, in turn, took the money and started to spend it immediately. When he went outside, he would immediately take a bottle, and the whole next day would pass in an alcoholic delirium. The next day, he'd wake up with a terrible hangover, beg for money, get drunk again. His life became a living hell. There seemed to be no way out of this hell. So it went on until one special winter day. Nick, stolen by the guards from the bar, planned to continue drinking alcoholic beverages, but already in a more modest place, and was about to find new drinking buddies. As suddenly, unexpectedly for himself, but quite expected for others. He collapsed on the winter near the bar. He tried to get back on his feet, but all in vain. He had too much to drink, and all he could do was mooch in one place and fall deeper into the snowdrift. That's how he met her. A young girl, short, with a big blue hat, stopped beside him. "You're all right. Should we call an ambulance?" Nick tried to focus on the person he was talking to, but it wasn't working. He didn't say anything. Something incomprehensible again tried to rise to his feet, but again lost. He collapsed even harder. "Are you drunk?" asked the girl. She took a step forward and tried to lift the rather large man to his feet. But her strength was not enough, and she almost fell into the snowdrift after him. "Are you drunk?" She confirmed her own words and was about to leave the drunkard in the snowdrift, but suddenly something clicked inside her. She examined the found drunkard, so handsome, and in such a state she couldn't leave him like that. And it was quite cold outside. Anyway, a passing girl took pity on the strange alcoholic and started to lift him to his feet. She managed to put him on the nearest bench. Taking a breath, she began to search his pockets in order to find a cell phone. She found it. The girl rejoiced. Fortunately, there was no lock. Digging through the contacts, strangers, and found it. As it seemed appropriate to her at the time, pressed the call button. "Hello, Nick." A voice sounded in the receiver, concerned Nina Mother Nick. "Hello, hello. My name is Nancy. I found your son right outside. He's not well. He seems drunk. It's freezing out. I don't think he should spend the night outside. Why don't you take him in?" "Oh," our woman's sobbing. "Thank you. Now, what's the address?" Nancy shifted her gaze to Nick, then listened in the voice of a woman she didn't know, lost, sad. She felt sorry for the poor mother and answered her cell phone. "You know, I can bring him myself. I'll call a cab now." "Oh, don't bother," Nick's mother lamented. "Well, if it's not too much trouble, I'll dictate the address." From that evening, the young people never parted again. Nancy brought Nick home, and grateful Nina, having paid for the cab, offered the girl to stay in the guest room. It was getting rather late. Nancy gladly agreed. After all, she was just passing through town. She was in town for a refresher course, and she didn't want to spend the night in the hostel where she was staying. The next day sobered up. Nick realized he'd fallen head over heels in love. Nancy was the girl he had dreamed of all his life. She was exactly what he wanted to be around. His late father. Kind-hearted, kind, sweet. She didn't leave a stranger in need. Spent her entire evening looking into Nancy's bright, sky-blue eyes at him. Nick was melting. Thanks to her, he quit drinking. Thanks to her, he was able to rebuild his reputation. The young people were married after 6 months of dating, and after another year together, their firstborn son was born to them. 5 years later, they had their long-awaited daughter. Unfortunately, Nick could not return to professional boxing because of his injury, but the knowledge he gained at the Sports Institute helped him to get a job as a masseur. After a few years of employment, Nick managed to open his own massage parlor and continue to work for his own pleasure. Beloved wife, children, happy family life finally helped to climb out of the hole in which he had driven himself. Finally, Nick fulfilled his father's advice. He married a good girl, and she bore him wonderful children. Too bad his father himself never lived to see that moment. Nick stood in the middle of his office. Lucy's running away from the reception made Nick's mind go blank. He hadn't realized how hard it could be to do the right thing in a situation like this. Of course, there were all kinds of people among his clients. Both men and women came to him for massages. Both professional athletes and ordinary people who wanted to relax under his strong and skillful hands. Of course, there were different situations. Some of the female clients sometimes explicitly hinted to Nick about further closer relationships. Others even openly asked him out on dates. But he had never had anyone as frank as Lucy before. Nick knew he was a handsome man. He was always handsome, even when he was lost at the bottom of a bottle. But as a rule, upon learning that Nick was happily married, lusting, his women would conciliatory raise their hands and abandon any attempt at intimacy. But this is Lucy. What was wrong with her? Nick shook his head and reached for a small notebook. Lying on the coffee table by the tightly finished window. Yep, another 35 minutes, Nick rejoiced. With the schedule before the next customer, there was still time, and the man decided not to waste it for nothing. He pulled his cell phone out of his pocket, opened his contacts, and poked his finger into his favorites, dialing the number hiding under the name Beloved Darling. "I'm not distracting you?" asked the man without waiting for his wife's reply. "Hello? No. "The next customer is in an hour and a half," the girl answered. "We're sitting with the girls, having coffee. And you were supposed to have a client right now." "Yes," Nick answered thoughtfully. "I should have, but she had already left. I thought if you're free to have a bite to eat too." "I still have half an hour to spare." Why did she leave? It was clear even on the phone. As the wife frowned. "Okay, then I'll come to you now, you tell me." "Waiting," said Nick. Before hanging up the cell phone, Nancy was a very ordinary girl. She was no better or worse than anyone else. She was just ordinary. Not particularly distinguished in appearance or intellect, a simple, unremarkable person. She grew up in a very ordinary family. She got average grades in high school and had average grades in college, and even among her sisters, she was average. She never dreamed of anything great, never envisioned herself as a star or an actress. From childhood, she knew that she would have a very ordinary life with an ordinary husband. Yes, Nancy thought she just knew her true worth well, though in truth she often failed to appreciate herself at face value. She always thought that something was wrong with her. Her height was too short, her clothes were too big, her eyes were too small, her nose was too small. Her grades were low and her knowledge was poor. Sometimes she even felt that she was not even an average girl, just some faceless gray mouse. After school, Nancy went to study at the Faculty of Economics, as all to anything, especially not striving. But after graduation, realizing that a decent profile work she cannot find, and decided to learn to master manicurist, attended various trainings and master classes. Trained thought, maybe she will be lucky in this field. But it all turned out to be as usual to the ugly ordinary. Nancy got a job in one of the most ordinary beauty salons and received an average salary for her work. She had already lost all interest in life until she met her Nick, the man of her dreams and future husband. Nick Nancy came to her hometown for work. The owner of the salon where she worked before she met her future husband insisted that her employees go to advanced training courses. Nancy did not even think to argue with her boss, so she was one of the first to go to another foreign city. Since Nancy didn't have much money, and the former boss, though she sent Nancy to the training and paid for the road, but didn't bother to pay for her accommodation, and the girl had to rent the cheapest one. With all the consequences, as they say, a hostel. On the day she met Nick, Nancy had left her courses in the direction of this temporary accommodation, which was on the very outskirts of the city. Nancy didn't know what could be worse, getting through the dark, dingy streets of the city passing bars and suspicious stores, or being in the hostel itself in a place where 8 people slept in one room and not all of them liked to shower. Nancy walked along the next bar, and as she passed it her heart began to pound with renewed vigor and her hands clutched the can to the point of pain. Not many people could be found in a place like this. Nancy had never thought that this was where she would meet her destiny. When she saw the man sick in the snowdrift, a strange feeling settled in her chest. Maybe fate itself was trying to give her a sign. When she saw Nick, Nancy really thought the man was ill. It didn't even occur to her that he was drunk. Nancy was a kind, sympathetic girl. She would never leave a man in distress. Everyone who knew Nancy at least a little noted these positive qualities of hers: kindness, willingness to help. But the girl herself saw nothing special in herself at all. It was difficult for her to see anything that would make her stand out from the crowd. When Nancy realized that the man didn't need help at all, and she was ready to pass on, but that unfamiliar feeling made her stop. That's when she got a good look at him. A tall, insanely handsome man was lying in the snow like an expensive, discarded toy. Seeing the features of his face, the girl couldn't take her eyes off him for a long time. Before this, Nancy had only seen such handsome people on the covers of fashion magazines. What was her older sister reading? Yes, on the television screen. For a handsome man like this man to pay attention to her, Nancy wouldn't even dream of it. And he looked kind of poor and lost. You could tell this man wasn't living his life. It was not without difficulty that she sat him down on the bench, found a black down jacket in the pocket, a cell phone, dialed her mother's number, called a cab, put the handsome man in the car, and drove off with him. While they were driving, the man fell asleep, collapsed on the shoulder of his savior. The girl's heart hammered with renewed vigor, though she realized that this man was just drunk. She enjoyed his closeness, his warmth. When Nina offered Nancy to spend the night at their house, Nancy gladly agreed. It was better than going back to that lousy hostel. And a chance to see the handsome man again. A mother saved. Stranger settled Nancy fresh bedding with painted on it seashells, fed warm salad with fried, shrimp scattered in gratitude. The next morning, when the girl was about to leave the apartment of her new acquaintances, she accidentally crossed paths with Nick in the hallway. Seeing him sober, Nancy was speechless. He seemed to have become even more handsome, even more masculine. He stared into her eyes for a long time. Nancy was embarrassed and immediately thought maybe there's something wrong with me. She lowered her head in embarrassment and was about to jump out of the apartment when suddenly she heard something she never expected to hear from such a man. "You're so beautiful, forgive me," Nick said quietly. Nancy couldn't believe her ears. A guy like that was paying attention to her. She had always thought she was unworthy of such men. After getting to know him better, Nancy was finally convinced that Nick was the man of her dreams, smart, handsome, caring. She just couldn't believe her happiness. Just like that, these young people found in each other what they both dreamed of. A couple like this had yet to be found. When Nick proposed to her, Nancy thought she was going crazy. In what way? He liked me. She asked herself the question many, many times daily. Nick told her lover how incredibly beautiful she was. But Nancy let all the compliments pass by her ears. The girl's complexes sat too deep in her mind. Probably she never fully believed in her happiness. A few years after the wedding passed very quietly and at the same time troublesome. Children appeared, and with them the inevitable domestic difficulties. True, the loving couple overcame all this easily. Their family life only became stronger after the appearance of a son, and then a daughter. But after Nick opened his massage parlor, Nancy realized that there was a new problem in her life. From inside, Nancy wished for a nasty gray feeling, a creepy jealousy. Nancy changed jobs, taking a job at the salon closest to Nick's studio. That way she felt she could control her spouse. When Nick and Nancy had a free moment, the girl always came to her husband's office. They had lunch together, drank coffee, and just had a good time. Nancy had seen many of her husband's clients. Beautiful, young, slim. Jealousy choked the young wife with a terrible force. In her mind, she well understood that Nick was incapable of cheating, but in her heart, the girl's heart bled. When she saw another new beauty walking into the office of her brutally handsome husband cheating, if it actually happened, would become for Nancy the most real nightmare. It scared the young mother to the point of tears and chest pain. Nick. The door to the office swung open, and Nancy stepped confidently inside. What happened? "Sweetheart," the man smiled broadly. He set aside the electric kettle that had just boiled and walked over to his wife and hugged her tightly. Bending almost in half, he buried his nose in her hair. "I've seen you since this morning, but I've missed you," he said, pulling away from Nancy. "How late are you working tonight?" "I have 3 clients today, but all after 12. The girl answered, looking around the office. "And you were supposed to have 5, but he was embarrassed. I'll be off early today. Then I'll pick up the kids myself." "Okay," Nancy replied. "So what happened with your client?" She went inside and sat down on the white leather sofa. "You never told me." "Well," the man became even more embarrassed, running his palm through his hair. "There had been a misunderstanding." "Forget it." Nick turned on the streams, walked over to a small coffee table on which stood a kettle, and began to go through the colored packages of tea bags in his hands. "Do you want tea or coffee?" "Tea, Nick." My wife interrupted the masseur. "What misunderstanding?" "I don't get it. Explain exactly what happened." Nick did not turn around, froze in place. He knew perfectly well how jealous his spouse was, and he did not want to tell about what had happened. Who knows how Nancy would react? Better to just keep quiet. "Well," stretched the man, "one client didn't like the massage. She left almost immediately without paying." He opened the rustling and wrapping of the tea bag with a sharp movement. "Such is the misunderstanding. I'll have black with cranberry." And you didn't like the massage. What kind of client is that? Who were you with this morning? She got up from the couch and walked over to the table where Nick was standing. Where's your notebook? Yeah, forget it. The man blurted out, almost stuttering, the new girl. You don't know. At the same moment, Nancy, who had found the notebook on the edge of the table, started flipping through it, looking for the information she needed. That's today, so who's here? She ran her eyes over her spouse's schedule in surprise. Her eyebrows went up. What, Lucy? How is that possible? She marveled. Well, the man, completely unable to lie, panicked the second he did. His spouse interrupted him. Lucy. That's the one I saw, isn't it? She asked glumly. That's your regular customer. Why does she come to you 5 times a week? If she doesn't like massages. Nick is finally embarrassed by this. That's babbling. Talon is different. Lucy, yeah, the new one. Just goes by the same name, Nancy, crossing her arms over her chest. Are you lying to me? She shouted out. Of course, she knew her husband well and knew perfectly well when he was lying. You're hiding something, Nick. Why are you lying to me? Nick stared at the floor. I'm sorry, I was just making excuses. He thought to himself he was a fool. It's time to learn how to lie properly. Lucy and I just had a little fight, that's all. No big deal. Really, just forget it. Still angry, Nancy replied. Her husband's last words to the contrary only served to irritate her. She looked around the office once more, really, this time much more carefully, wondered what he was hiding. She looked at Nick once more. He was smiling with his mouth full. Nancy knew full well that smile did not bode well. Nick was blatantly lying, looking her straight in the face. She walked around the studio hoping to see something that would help her deal with the situation. She peeked behind the changing screen and nearly passed out from shock. What is this? With tears in her eyes, Nancy screamed in front of the man's face at the stranger's accountant. You cheated? I was cheated on by Nancy. It seemed as if the worst of her nightmares had been fulfilled. She literally forgot how to breathe. The girl continued to shake her bra until, slowly, she settled right down on the cold stove. Paul, how could you? You swore to be faithful always, the girl said quietly. Life seemed to have lost all meaning. Why did you do this to me? Nick squatted down in front of his wife. There was real, genuine horror in his eyes. I didn't cheat on you, honey, he said. I put my hand to the girl's cheek. I swear I would never. Then what is it? She asked with a nod, pointing to the bra she still held tightly in her hand. At that second, she felt as if she had been electrocuted. She shoved the stranger's item away from her in disgust to another corner in the studio. Images of both that girl's husband and the other girl's husband immediately came to mind. Her heart seemed to be slowly inserting a thick and long needle of betrayal. I did not cheat on you, the man firmly repeated his words. He pulled his spouse by the arms, forcing her up from the floor, sat her down on the couch. You see, it's Lucy. And he told his wife everything that had happened to him. This morning told not withhold loved ones not a bit. It seems that on that day he was able to realize one important thing: wife is better never to lie. No matter how awful the truth might be, especially since it was really not his fault at all. Nancy listened to her husband without interrupting. When the story was over, she looked carefully into his eyes. You're not lying. Nancy said quietly, carefully looking over Nick. The man didn't know how to lie at all. So to understand. When he was telling the truth, it was easy to understand. She got up from the couch, walked over to Nick, and rising on tiptoe, kissed him on the cheek. Thank you for the truth. I'm sorry, Nick apologized nonstop. I just didn't want you to be nervous, especially such an act by that girl. I know how jealous you are. I just didn't want you to worry. I understand, nodded Nancy. Next time says things like that. You did well for discovering that Lucy. I hope she doesn't come again. I too, said Nick, shifted from foot to foot. Actually, the man was being sly. He didn't want to lose that kind of clientele at all. Of course, it wasn't because she had a crush on him, but she paid good money for massages. It's just that she was a regular client of mine. It's a shame we're losing a certain amount of money a week. Of course, she wasn't the only one who kept our earnings, but we would still notice the absence of that money. I understand, finished Nancy's husband's sentence. She adjusted the edge of her striped shirt. Okay, I'll think of something. You asked the man in surprise. Honey, you're my best, of course, but how are you going to help here? You'll get more customers. I'm against it. Are you tired enough as it is? No, Nancy replied. It's just that I'm just, shall we say, advertising my services. I have a couple of wealthy ladies in my clientele. Maybe I should give them your number. I could use the extra money anyway. That way we can make up for the money we lost. You think it'll work? With hope in your voice? The man asked. It would be great. You're so clever. Stop it. Laughing, his wife stopped him. She looked at her left wrist, wearing a small, dainty watch. Do you have a client? I'll be off in 11 minutes. By the way, who do you have there? Nick smiled broadly at the man. Don't worry. Nancy smiled tiredly back. I will go then from daycare, from school. The kids are being picked up today by Yumi. Nick pulled his wife into a hug. After the last conversation between the couple, Nancy had the rather important task of helping Nick find new, and most importantly, regular customers. As jealous as the girl was, she couldn't help but recognize the fact that her spouse was an excellent masseur, and hiding such a good master from the rest of the family would be a real crime. The family budget was mostly kept on Nick's earnings. Of course, Nancy earned money herself, but her salary, her wages were many times lower. Nancy had been working in a rather good and expensive beauty parlor for several years. Among the clientele were some truly rich and even famous ladies in town. This salon was one of the most prestigious in the city. It employed many good masters, manicurists, colonists, hairdressers, and a beautician. True, the paychecks weren't as shiny as the clients. Kelly, the owner of the salon, was a lady of groomed, luxurious appearance. She was incredibly wealthy, but she kept her female employees in a tight grip. A late fee didn't please the hostess. Appearance was also a fine. The fines poured down on the workers literally by the river. The workers of the beauty salon often gathered together to get over the bones of sweat, annoying boss. But beyond simple conversations and gossip, nothing went. Painfully, such a workplace was a famous elite. In such a salon, you could gain experience, make useful acquaintances, find girlfriends. In general, you could get almost everything, but not earn good money. Nick, as soon as he opened his own salon, began to bring his family a really good income. Of course, the expenses also increased. It was necessary to pay for the rent of the premises, but the income still turned out to be many times more. The family was able to afford a good apartment in the mortgage. The eldest schoolboy son was given to paid additional and prestigious classes in a sports school. In general, Nick was now earning really well, so quite expected the loss of his clients. Not at all in the family's plans. Nancy decided that she would find her husband new clients by all means. Nancy hissed at the tall, skinny girl with a big gap between her teeth. Where'd you disappear to? I went to my husband's for coffee. Nancy started to make excuses. I've got plenty of time before my next client. I don't understand why I have to come to 8 o'clock when the first client is at 1 o'clock, because the salon works from 8. The girl, the receptionist, kept hissing. You get a ticket. Nancy rolled her eyes, as if it was possible not to get a ticket. What's the problem? It's not like I don't have any clients at this time, yeah. But there might have been some. The receptionist looked arrogantly down at her interlocutor. What if a client came in and wanted an emergency manicure? And we don't have any available masters. You didn't think about that. She was here. Before I left, I checked with her to see if she was going anywhere. Nancy parried. She's a great technician. And it's unlikely that in the half hour I was gone there would have been a flood of customers without appointments. Nancy squared her shoulders proudly, noting how annoyed the receptionist was beginning to get. Well, I'm off to work. Those spit out the receptionists. Go and wait to be fined. Nancy's working day went on as usual. The master listened much more attentively to her clients, trying not to miss the slightest detail from the simple gossip. Just in case someone had a stiff neck or a sore back. She tried to be friendly. She tried to catch the right moment when she could promote her husband's work openly and without embarrassment. The first client turned out to be a young and pretty girl, and in the first minute, Nancy felt a slight prick of jealousy. My Nick is going to get fat, Nancy thought, but tried to push the unpleasant thoughts away. She tried to get her client to talk, but she was unfortunately quite silent. The young lady stared lazily at her cell phone screen, while Nancy was giving her complicated extensions. The second client was a bit more cooperative. The middle-aged woman refused and blurted out to her manicurist. She managed to complain about her fool of a husband and tell about her son's school problems. Tell the story of her younger sister, who cheated on her boyfriend. When the client finally fell silent, and Nancy gently asked if she was interested in contacts of a good masseur, the woman was taken aback. "What do you think you're doing?" She was indignant. "Keeping your distance?" Nancy was beginning to lose hope. Of course, it was only the first day when the girl was trying to find clients for Nick, but she was noticeably asleep. And really so, since you can't openly advertise extraneous services here. Finally, the day came to an end, and Nancy sat moodily waiting for the last client. She had already gotten a text message from her spouse. He wrote that he had picked up the kids and the whole family was waiting for her at home. Nancy couldn't wait until the end of the workday. What if the client canceled the appointment? Finally, there was a quiet clack of heels, and the receptionist entered the employee room. "Nancy, your client is here." The girl was finally happy. "Remind me who your regular aunt is." Well, the administrator thought, "Go already, if you don't want fines." Nancy smirked and went back into the hall. There already sat her last customer for the day, an adult large woman. She looked to be in her late 50s. Adriana Constant on the wall, this woman looked like she was cut out of some movie about the lives of rich and powerful matrons. She always wore a rough woody perfume, hers dark. Her red hair was styled in a 60s hairstyle, and her big glasses with black and right. Already too much made her look like a frog. Nancy said hello, sat down in her seat across from her. Next to this woman, she always felt a kind of inexplicable calm, a peacefulness. Adriana seemed to be able to protect her from everything in the world. Nancy was suddenly reminded of her own mother. "It's good to see you." The girl smiled broadly at her client. "What are we doing today?" "Thank you, Nancy." Adriana nodded discreetly in response as usual, manicure and red coating, gel varnish. "You know I don't cheat on myself." Nancy smiled again. "Of course I do. Then let's get started." The girl began to remove the old coatings from the client's nails. She decided to continue their conversation. "That's why I love you, Nancy. You never impose your taste on me. And the other masters, why do they always pester me with their glitter designs? Whenever you come, it starts right away." Adriana raised the tone of her voice, trying to portray the masters she was fed up with. "Let's try it once. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on." "Bub, why are they doing this?" And Nancy laughed modestly. "It's just that we masters like to do new things. So we offer to try different designs, in case the client agrees. And I don't suggest you, because I know you well. Red gloss is your everything." The woman laughed. "That's right." She suddenly frowned sharply, grabbing the back of her neck with her free hand. "Oh, it hurts. My strength is gone," complained the client, holding the back of her wide neck. "Did you sell it?" Nancy stirred. This is the right moment, she thought to herself. The girl aloud tried to give her voice the most open-minded tone. "They say that in such cases massage helps well," carelessly answered the master, trying not to give away her own excitement. What if I scared her off? Yes, Adriana thoughtfully stretched out, examining her brush before putting it in the lamp. "Where do you get a good painter?" "Honey, who do I go to? They're all crooks. Good craftsmen are worth their weight in gold these days. But you know what I mean." Nancy read. Olive wrote think. "I don't know, there are some good masseurs." "Well, who's arguing?" The client was surprised. "Of course there are, but you still need to find them." "I had a good master. And what do you think? He left for another country." The woman sighed deeply. "What can we do in such times?" Nancy took her eyes off her client's nails and looked into her eyes with confidence. "It's time," she thought to herself. Adriana, you know my husband's a masseur, and he's got a couple openings right now. He's great. Can I give you his number? Nancy asked, and holding her breath, went back to the monitor. Adriana was silent for a long time. Nancy, unable to bear the long pause, blurted out, I think you are the one who can be discounted. The woman laughed loudly at Nancy. What kind of discount? You think I'm figuring out if I have enough money? She shook her head angrily. I'm just thinking, the man's a masseur. What if he starts hitting on me? And the woman laughed again. I'm kidding. I'm kidding about that assumption. Nancy shuddered. No, you don't, she said quietly. I promise, I'm kidding about that in his salon. Interrupted Nancy. Adriana in his salon. I mean, he has his own salon. Interesting. She scratched her chin with her free hand. Well, give me your husband's contacts. Let's see. What kind of masseur is he? You know me? I'm a loyal and kind client. If I'm happy with it, I'll go all the time. And if a massage helps my neck, I'd pay any money. But what neighborhood is his salon in? It's not far away. Delighted, Nancy replied. She applied the last layer, and while the client was smothering her nails in the lamp, she looked for her husband's business card. Here you go. Nancy proudly raised her chin. I'm sure you'll like it. My husband is a real master of his craft. I'll be waiting for your feedback. Adriana looked at the manicure with interest. Good she did, as she did too often again for long periods of silence. It's beautiful. I don't know about your husband's massage, but you do an amazing manicure. Nancy, you're a talent. You should open your own salon by now. Nancy looked down at the floor, embarrassed. Tell me about it. What talent? Nancy returned home in high spirits. Her first day as an advertising executive, and already such a success. Although Nancy didn't know exactly who her regular client was, one thing she did know was that the woman had a lot of money. Nancy went into the apartment, took off her old shoes, and her son Tom was next to her. Mommy screamed, Oi, you're home. He ran up to his mother and literally clung to her. You're going to see the model I made in class today. Nancy couldn't hold back a smile, but of course she was only changing clothes now. She made her way inside the apartment and went about her routine. Washed her hands, changed into her home clothes, kissed her baby daughter. When she had already watched everything the older child wanted to show her and listened to the babe babble, Nancy went out to the kitchen there, with her head down on her hands, sat her husband Nick, called her husband the girl. Why are you so sullen? The man shuddered, as if he had been pulled out of his reverie. He looked around and stared at his wife in surprise. Nancy, you're home. I didn't hear you come in. He jumped to his feet and started pacing the kitchen, as if he were a real housewife. She was here. Before I left, I checked with her to see if she was going anywhere. Nancy parried. She's a great technician, and it's unlikely that in the half hour I was gone there would have been a flood of customers without appointments. Nancy squared her shoulders proudly, noting how annoyed the receptionist was beginning to get. Well, I'm off to work. Those spit out the receptionists. Go and wait to be fined. Nancy's working day went on as usual. The master listened much more attentively to her clients, trying not to miss the slightest detail from the simple gossip. Just in case someone had a stiff neck or a sore back. She tried to be friendly. She tried to catch the right moment when she could promote her husband's work openly and without embarrassment. The first client turned out to be a young and pretty girl, and in the first minute, Nancy felt a slight prick of jealousy. My Nick is going to get fat, Nancy thought, but tried to push the unpleasant thoughts away. She tried to get her client to talk, but she was unfortunately quite silent. The young lady stared lazily at her cell phone screen, while Nancy was giving her complicated extensions. The second client was a bit more cooperative. The middle-aged woman refused and blurted out to her manicurist. She managed to complain about her fool of a husband and tell about her son's school problems. Tell the story of her younger sister, who cheated on her boyfriend. When the client finally fell silent, and Nancy gently asked if she was interested in contacts of a good masseur, the woman was taken aback. What do you think you're doing? She was indignant. Keeping your distance? Nancy was beginning to lose hope. Of course, it was only the first day when the girl was trying to find clients for Nick, but she was noticeably asleep. And really so, since you can't openly advertise extraneous services here. Finally, the day came to an end, and Nancy sat moodily waiting for the last client. She had already gotten a text message from her spouse. He wrote that he had picked up the kids and the whole family was waiting for her at home. Nancy couldn't wait until the end of the workday. What if the client canceled the appointment? Finally, there was a quiet clack of heels, and the receptionist entered the employee room. "Nancy, your client is here." The girl was finally happy. "Remind me who your regular aunt is." Well, the administrator thought, "Go already, if you don't want fines." Nancy smirked and went back into the hall. There already sat her last customer for the day, an adult large woman. She looked to be in her late 50s. Adriana Constant on the wall, this woman looked like she was cut out of some movie about the lives of rich and powerful matrons. She always wore a rough woody perfume, hers dark. Her red hair was styled in a 60s hairstyle, and her big glasses with black and right. Already too much made her look like a frog. Nancy said hello, sat down in her seat across from her. Next to this woman, she always felt a kind of inexplicable calm, a peacefulness. Adriana seemed to be able to protect her from everything in the world. Nancy was suddenly reminded of her own mother. "It's good to see you." The girl smiled broadly at her client. "What are we doing today?" "Thank you, Nancy." Adriana nodded discreetly in response as usual, manicure and red coating, gel varnish. "You know I don't cheat on myself." Nancy smiled again. "Of course I do. Then let's get started." The girl began to remove the old coatings from the client's nails. She decided to continue their conversation. "That's why I love you, Nancy. You never impose your taste on me. And the other masters, why do they always pester me with their glitter designs? Whenever you come, it starts right away." Adriana raised the tone of her voice, trying to portray the masters she was fed up with. "Let's try it once. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on." "Bub, why are they doing this?" And Nancy laughed modestly. "It's just that we masters like to do new things. So we offer to try different designs, in case the client agrees. And I don't suggest you, because I know you well. Red gloss is your everything." The woman laughed. "That's right." She suddenly frowned sharply, grabbing the back of her neck with her free hand. "I'll find you some clients. Honey, I promise," in a confident tone, the girl said. Now her goal became more tangible and more important than it had been in the morning. The next day started as it usually did. The whole family always left the house together. The spouses took the children to the garden and to school. And then Nick always accompanied his wife to the door of the salon where she worked. Nancy kissed her husband on the cheek and disappeared behind the wide glass doors. Kelly's boss was already standing at the receptionist's desk. "Good morning." Nancy smiled at her coworkers and bowed her head lightly. "Kelly, you look great." The salon owner humbled her subordinate with a stern look. "Kind I know." Low voice said the woman and continued to look incredulously at the master. "What's he got you wearing?" Nancy looked embarrassed. She lowered her gaze, examining her clothes. She was wearing a light, airy beige dress and small florals on her feet, open-toed shoes with a small heel. "I'm wearing a dress." Quietly, she replied. "I can see that the dress," snapped Kelly. "It does not suit you at all. Such a figure as you should hide, not emphasize all the shortcomings of the wrong clothes." The woman wrinkled her nose squeamishly and then summarized, "You are fine. Now go to work." Nancy guiltily lowered her head. On the whole, this outcome of events was quite expected. But she was already tired of hearing insults from her boss. She was ready to turn around and leave the hall, but something made her stop and try to defend her rights. Kelly began confidently, "But what difference does it make how I'm dressed? If I'm going to put my uniform on top of my dress anyway?" The supervisor snickered. "Because that tastelessness will be noticeable anyway. I want my salon to employ not just good craftsmen, but people who are pleasant to look at. If you're still doing okay on the first point, on the second, you should think better about what you wear and how you look on your days off. Do what you want and look how you want. But at work, be kind enough to follow all the rules freely." Nancy took a deep breath. but there was no suitable answer to her argument. So she decided to simply retreat. "I will go to work." Quietly, the girl replied and headed towards the staff room. As she left, Nancy turned around and took a closer look at her boss. Putting aside the excessive bitchiness and the picky-faced lady, Kelly, in general, even liked Nancy. The woman always looked simply adorable. For example, today she was wearing a gorgeous black pantsuit. On her feet flaunted neat black loafers on a medium heel. Complementing this laconic image was a bright, small Birkin handbag. On her perfect from the iron to us face was applied no less perfect makeup, quite liquid from Nature Light. Brown hair was cut short and arranged in a neat hairstyle. Even the purposely leftover lock of gray hair looked on the woman, organically adding a certain zest to its owner. When Nancy had seen her future boss when she'd applied for a job here, for the first time, it seemed to her that she had her own special charm. This woman had an unshakable self-confidence. An incredible energy radiated from her. Nancy still remembered how she had described the woman when she had told her husband about her. She looked like an eternal vampire. She spoke with undisguised admiration in her voice. That's exactly the impression she had of Kelly. And there was generally a grain of truth to that description, as if the woman was signing off with energy from everyone else. All the fines, the reproaches of sneers. The feeling was that Kelly was doing well in front of her eyes when she expressed her dislike of yet another female employee. "What's with the sweater?" "Terrible fine," said in a menacing tone the supervisor, a young girl, and it seemed with each such phrase another of her wrinkles just revived, and the gray strand dissolved before her eyes, returning to its former color. Yes, Nancy really did like Kelly. There was something unusual about her, something that was beyond Nancy's own reach. The girl often looked at her boss like this. She wanted to understand how she always managed to look so gorgeous. Maybe she takes some vitamins, or all that cold and high forehead Botox. Either way, the secret of her beauty was as interesting to Nancy as anything else. More than once or twice, Nancy had enlisted the help of the internet to find out a little more about the bossy woman. What was her surprise when she found old pictures? Even as a young hopeful, there was nothing special about that girl at all. An ordinary gray mouse with no distinguishing appearance and her own flaws. An average girl just like Nancy herself. How did she manage to achieve such beauty without having any natural data? This question tormented Nancy more than any other. Maybe she would be able to achieve the same success someday, though Nancy did not admit it even to herself. In her heart, she would like to repeat the success of her supervisor, to become as beautiful, successful, confident as she was, to have her own beauty parlor. The working day was in full swing, but Nancy had no luck with the abundance of customers. A woman who was supposed to have come in earlier in the morning postponed the appointment, and the one who signed up at lunchtime never deigned to come. As a result, for the first half of the working day, Nancy broke down idly and left the workplace. She was afraid to do so. It seemed the supervisor was in no mood today. Oh, and there was nowhere to go. Nick, on the other hand, had a busy day. As a result, Nancy sat down in the back room in the company of her colleague Helen, a makeup artist. Helen had a pretty free day as well. This young blonde-haired girl had a round, freckled face, and her hair seemed to be pure white in color. Helen looked around fearfully and, realizing that there was no one else in the room but herself and Nancy, took a drag on her strawberry-flavored electronic cigarette. "You're not quitting, are you?" Nancy asked reproachfully, looking at her colleague. Helen Luxury was angry, fixed on herself a black-as-night sweatshirt with overly long sleeves. "No, as you can see." "Well, I quit cigarettes," and this she inhaled sweet and nicotine vapor again. "That's not real." A puff of sweet-smelling vapor drifted lazily across the room. Nancy squeezed her eyes shut. "Yeah, right, there's nicotine in there. So you're still smoking, albeit in a different format." "Long time for you," Helen replied in a deep, low voice. "You saw how angry the lion was today. Even angrier than usual. It's horrible. I've even been fined already." Nancy smiled sadly at her friend. At first glance, it might have seemed that the two could have nothing in common. But for some reason, they quickly found common ground. Oh, come on. Why? Helen asked. Let me guess. 3 seconds late. Smiled wrong. Nancy laughed back. Helen continued, well, I'm wrong again. Too much on the shower with not a soul at all. Not Tommy. Nancy got up from the small sofa the girls were sitting on and spun around in front of Lena. Developing her dress, Helen jumped up on the spot, realized huffed, and she blinked embarrassed by her excessive volume. Wrong clothes. Case in point. Nancy sat back down on the couch. When your next client isn't anytime soon. Helen pulled out her cell phone and started flipping through the news feed. Boring, she stretched out, by the way. Do you know why she's so angry today, and why is that? Nancy asked interestedly. Do you think it was my dress that pissed her off? No, answered Helen. She quickly tucked her phone back into her pocket and switched to conspiratorial. Whisper leaned in close to Nancy's ear. You knew she had just gotten back from the ski resort. Yeah, I heard something like that. What about it? Nancy asked. So Cindy told me what Wendy told her. And Wendy told Kelly that she fell off her skis. They say it's the bruises. She can barely stand on her feet. Can you believe it? Helen's face expressed genuine interest. There was a feeling that the girl was telling not second-rate work gossip, but a real-world secret. And you know what else they say? Shit. Nancy shook her head disappointedly, pulling away from her friend. What's the big deal? Fell off her skis? What's the big deal? It's not even gossip. No, it's not. Helen grabbed her friend's hand and pulled her back to her. They say she just told Wendy that, but she didn't really fall. Hey, they say she's the one with the new lover. She left poor Helen all bruised and giggling behind her. Can you believe it, Nancy? I laughed at you a long time ago. What a load of crap. Who says that? Helen pouted resentfully, painted, liquid-split pale pink lips. Cindy herself heard Kelly talking to her lover on the phone and told me what a broken phone it was. I don't know, Nancy stretched out. Cindy likes to exaggerate. Helen waved her hand cheerfully. But so what? She ventured to take a drag on the electronic cigarette again. But then she heard the clatter of heels somewhere outside the door and had to jump to her feet, waving her arms so that the person who entered wouldn't see the thick vapor. Nancy, the receptionist, Wendy came into the back room. You have a customer without an appointment. Oh, great. The manicure master rose to her feet, caught wearing her work apron. I'm on my way. Wendy humbled her colleague with a judgmental look. See why you can't leave in the middle of the workday. That's exactly why. Okay. Nancy was laboring over a complicated nail extension. Her sudden client, a young girl of about 35, smelled interestingly of berries, of perfume. And on her wide t-shirt was a brightly colored logo. The customer herself was a little wordy. She explained in 2 words what shape of nails she wanted, and never decided on the color. Hooked on wireless full-size headphones, Master Manicurist realized that the client is not ready to make small talk, so she plunged into her own thoughts. Interestingly, when she could work in silence, Nancy's manicure was much better and more beautiful. She was expectantly thinking about the fate of her family. Where are we going to find clients for Nick? She wondered to herself. Probably every 5 minutes the idea of looking for a husband's clientele among her own female clients was not a bad idea, but not always feasible. For example, she had never managed to try offering the services of a massage therapist to anyone today. Probably shouldn't offer massages to everyone. Summarized. The girl is standing there, asking the women. Maybe they have a pain or a relative? That would be the right thing to do. Nancy, having finished the process of build-up in the waiting room, looked at the clientele. She pulled the large gold-colored headphones off her ears. Why? The client asked irritably. Have you decided on the color? It's time to apply the coating, answered Nancy, smiling at the client's mouth. Now the girl began to carelessly flip through the palette of colors. Well, let's go with this one. She poked her finger. Brown color. Yes, and the matte finish is everything. She asked before pulling her headphones back on. No, blurted out Nancy before she could think about what she was doing. What else is there? Nancy asked irritably. Realizing that there was nowhere to go, she decided to go ahead. Forgive me for asking, but do you have any pain in you or maybe your relatives? I could recommend a good masseur. If you need one, of course. The client frowned unhappily. No, thank you. That'll be all. She asked unhappily. Yes, sorry, answered Nancy and started to work. The girl put her headphones back on, and that was the end of the awkward dialogue. You can't do that either, Nancy thought. The workday was coming to an end. Nancy had a few more customers, but she didn't dare to offer her husband's services to any of them. When Nancy was about to go home, she was suddenly summoned to her boss's office. What's wrong? She thought and fearfully opened the office door. Kelly, you wanted to see me. She quietly closed the massive door leading into the office behind her. Yes, the woman replied sternly, not taking her eyes off the computer. Her desk stood in the middle of the large office. On her right hand was a giant indoor plant in a dark brown pot. On the left hand was a small replica of the statue of David. Nancy had been in this office before, but the pomp and pageantry of the place intimidated her. She asked the supervisor if I'd done something wrong. Of course you did. Kelly started yelling. What are you doing here? What do you think this is, a publicity stall? Nancy blushed from head to toe in embarrassment. I'm sorry. She started to justify herself. I just asked a couple times if anyone needed a massage, that's all. You see, my husband. And I don't care. The woman rose from the table, but the sharp pain made her plop ridiculously back into the chair. She cried out, rubbing her back with her hand and searching for something in a drawer. Nancy looked fearfully at her boss as she was suddenly reminded of today's silly gossip. Her whole body really hurt. Thought Nancy slightly embarrassed at having rejoiced in that fact. She began to think out the words to discreetly offer her spouse's services. But Kelly was the first to speak up. I don't care what your husband's up to. In my salon, my employees have no right to advertise anything, much less violate the personal boundaries of my clients. Why the hell are you asking our ladies about their personal business? This is unthinkable. Kelly angrily reprimanded Anne's subordinate, and at the same time managed to take some pill, claiming it with water from a beautiful glass bottle. Forgive me, it's just that I saw that my regular client had neck pain. So I offered my husband's help. He's a massage therapist, and then I did offer first. I apologize again. It's just that we're having financial difficulties. So the woman raised her hand up, thus ordering the subordinate masseur to shut up. She repeated the word after Nancy thoughtfully. I could use a good masseur too. Nancy blossomed. Why don't you leave my husband's card? He's very good at what he does. Kelly laughed evilly. I need the best of the best, not your hubby. Don't take it all out. I'm gonna get worse while you get off with a fine. And if you keep on firing me... Sorry, Nancy's drowning in her own apologies. She left her boss's office distraught. If we can't offer services here, how will Nick find new clients? A week passed. Nancy continued to work, but could no longer afford to advertise Nick's massage parlor in any way. As time went on, and the need for upcoming payments grew closer and closer, the family couldn't help but feel frustrated. Adriana, Nancy's favorite and most loyal customer, visited Nick and was as pleased as ever. She immediately booked her next appointment and left a generous tip. However, one client really wasn't enough. Money in the family was getting scarce and expenses were increasing. Nick tried to advertise the services as best he could, but the truth was harsh. The man wasn't very good at it. And on top of that, Nick once again lost a client. A middle-aged woman decided to ask the masseur out on a date. But when she found out that he was married, she refused his services completely. Nick fell more and more into a depressive state, and Nancy began to sound the alarm. Nick's business must be saved. In one of the most ordinary working days, the girl had an unexpected event. She was called again to her superiors. Did you call for me? Asked Nancy, covering the door behind her. Something's wrong. Kelly looked even better than usual. Her plump lips never lost their smile and her eyes lit up like a girl's. Nancy was genuinely surprised at the woman's happy appearance. The one pronounced yes named. "Come in, sit down," she said, continuing to smile radiantly. Nancy was taken aback for the first time in all the time she had worked here. She was asked to sit across from her. She took a leather chair standing nearby. A nasty squeak echoed around the room. Kelly rolled her eyes demonstratively, but made no comment on the wall of awkwardness. She waited until the subordinates were seated and began to speak. "I wanted to ask you something. You're Nancy, aren't you?" Nancy raised her blonde eyebrows. "Right. What's good? You mean Nick is your husband?" "Yes," she answered, stammering slightly. "And he's a masseur, yes, the one you advertised so fervently." The woman continued to ask me strange questions. Yes, that's right. And again, I apologize. Interesting." Kelly stepped forward a little bit. "And how long have you two been together? How's your married life?" "It's fine." Nancy had already completely lost the meaning of this dialogue. "But for a long time, now we have a pretty grown-up son in school and a daughter in kindergarten. Everything's great. Family life is just fine." "But why do you ask?" Kelly laughed. "It's not important that way." She smiled, flashing her teeth. She seemed to read respect in her eyes. Kelly said, "I wonder if it was the Nancy girl who got herself such a handsome man." "How did you do it with your looks?" Nancy went cold. She got nervous. All words were forgotten. A burning resentment began to wash over her. Of course, she had often thought herself unworthy of her spouse, but to hear it from a stranger. To hear it from a stranger was very, very unpleasant. Nancy continued to be sullenly silent. "Well done." Suddenly, her boss praised her. "They say he really is a good masseur." "That's true." Finally, Nancy found the strength to answer. "May I ask who's talking?" "Have you heard any rumors of his skill?" "But you could say that. There's a respectable man who's already signed up with your Nick. Regular customers. Who they are is not important. Not that it's any of your business." Kelly thought about something. And then she said, "To be honest, when you told me about your husband, the masseur seemed to me to be, well, some average specialist. And here is such a man. It's good to think about it. Thank you, you can go." Nancy, and would have asked something else, but the stern look of her boss made her leave the office. Who is this mystery man? Kelly's advice to Nick Nancy was lost in speculation. But in any case, a client like her boss was quite good. A rich lady with plenty of free time for massages, the perfect customer for the service. And of course, Nancy was pleased with the fact that Kelly was already a lady of age. It meant there was no need to be jealous. That night, she returned home in high spirits. She couldn't wait to tell Nick that a new client had been found. And of course, to ask who exactly the mystery man was in his regulars. "Honey, I'm home." Nancy quickly disrobed and immediately ran into the kitchen in search of Nick. Always when he finished work early, he was busy cooking dinner. Nancy opened the door to no one. Strange, she thought, and headed straight for the bedroom. There was no one in the bedroom either. Nancy frowned, heading for the children's room, who were already home. "Tom." The girl called out to her oldest son. "Where's Daddy?" The boy smartly corrected his small, round, and cheeks went. "I'm in charge of the eldest now. I'm watching Molly." "What do you mean gone?" Nancy asked. "Where?" "On business." "Why are you being such a baby?" "You'd better see what I made today." Tom began to show his mother all his handicrafts. Nancy herself, though she didn't show it in front of the children, was nervous. Where could Nick go without telling her? When the children were subdued and put to bed, Nancy was worried. Suddenly something was wrong. There was no way to panic. Soon there was the sound of the door opening. "Nick." The girl rushed into the hallway, planning to ask her husband where you've been. And Nick, it seemed, did not expect to see his wife at home. "Oh, I went to work." "Work?" Nancy asked in surprise. "Isn't it a little late for work?" Nick rubbed his eyes tiredly. "I know it's late. I'm sorry. It's just some client. Couldn't get here any earlier, and he really wanted to make an appointment with me, so I made him an appointment for tonight. There's no such thing as too much money, especially in this case. I picked up the kids, took them home, and almost straight back to the studio. Terribly tired." Nancy looked her husband carefully straight in the eye. Tired indeed. Thick lashes covered the top of the pouting green eyes. His hands were trembling. Nancy, forgetting what she wanted to tell, clarified, This client is he who? A man? Nick nodded. Don't worry, honey, I wouldn't trade you for anyone. The man mauled his wife in the forehead and disappeared behind the bathroom door. Nancy was left puzzled. Nick never took clients this late in the day. He always said evening was time for family. Of course, given that expenses had gone up considerably, and the money really couldn't hurt, he was doing the right thing. But Nancy still felt something was wrong. That same night, when the spouses were getting ready for bed, the girl remembered what she wanted to tell her beloved. By the way, she suddenly exclaimed, putting aside the white tube of cream on the table. I wanted to tell you something. What asked Nick was already almost asleep. He rolled over from side to back, but he didn't open his eyes. I'm not at work. I mean, yes and no. You know, I was able to convince my boss to see you. She's very well paid. I think she could leave a nice tip. What do you think? Tipping is unlikely, Nick said quietly. She's the one who looks like a vampire. She's the Kelly. Really, not really. I convinced her, of course, but I contributed to it. She said you were recommended to her by someone who started seeing you on a regular basis. I wonder who that is? Who do you think? I don't know, Nastya. The man yawned contagiously. Let's go to sleep. Come on. The girl reached for the cotton lamp and turned off the light. For a second, she thought her husband had not agreed to something. Time passed. Life went on. At first glance, it might seem as if nothing had changed in the family's life. But Nancy couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on. Some little thing, something that was unnoticeable, but definitely went wrong. The girl tried to figure out what it was, but there was no way she could look at it with her full wide eyes. With each passing day, Nancy felt something bad approaching. Some background anxiety settled in her soul. Every day this anxiety grew and grew. And now it had become quite noticeable and significant. But what exactly was she afraid of? Nancy could not understand it. Nick worked more and more often. He wasn't home in the evenings. Nancy tried not to make a big deal of it. After all, he was working for the good of their family. But she couldn't hide her dissatisfaction. The couple began to quarrel more and more. More and more often they preferred to dine in complete silence. Gradually, Nancy's worries turned into a real phobia. Could it be that her husband had fallen out of love with her? Concerned, she even set a trap for her husband. She had a copy of the keys to the studio where Nick worked. And one day she prepared herself in advance and arrived unannounced at her husband's office just as he was taking on another evening client. I do not remember myself from jealousy. She burst into the studio. Not realizing what she expected to see the girl almost with a foot open the studio and the doors, and whirlwind flew into the massage room. The elderly man receiving the massage was furious. He had never expected some, as he put it, crazy girl to barge in at the time of the appointment. So Nick lost another regular customer, and the couple's relationship soured even further. In one of Nancy's working days, she had an interesting dialogue, which later greatly influenced her future life. Nancy, hi. Helen burst into the staff room. Her blonde hair was gathered in a high, careless bun. Her long legs were pulled back by leather tights, and a wide, lightweight sweatshirt developed as she plowed into the room. What are you doing here? Not enough customers again. Nancy set to the side a small cup decorated with an angel. No, there are plenty of customers, but they're all after 12 again. Why am I sitting here? What's the point of us coming in at 800? I don't understand. The girl slightly tilted her head to the side. It would be nice to come at whatever time the first client is scheduled. Helen shrugged her shoulders. Well, you know, if someone comes in without an appointment, so you have to sit. The makeup artist took out a powder from her lacquered black bag. She opened it up and began to scrutinize her makeup. I've got a lot of clients today. That's great, Len, Nancy exclaimed. Are you having any luck today? No, it's you, I know. But wouldn't one manicurist be enough? And those who come without an appointment, not so many. And in general, in other salons, if there are no available masters, customers turn around. Well, you're right. Helen slammed his powder down loudly. Really, what are you sitting here for? Go get some rest and go see Nick. You can be free as a breeze until 12. Aha. I don't want to get another ticket like that. Oh no, I'm not sitting here. That's all right. We need the money now. We can't lose a dime. Oh, come on. Helen smirked. No one will find you, there's no one. Go easy, don't worry, there's no money in your ear anyway, and won't be anytime soon, or even in the next couple of weeks. Nancy looked at her friend questioningly. What do you mean? That she's away again? I didn't know. No, you didn't, Helen replied irritably. You see, you don't listen to local gossip and are not aware of what's going on. So listen, the girl quickly looked at the time, and making sure that she had a couple of minutes before the client sat down next to Nancy, and began to tell her friend the latest gossip. Our aunt has found herself another man handsome. They say he looks like some actor. But what about this new man? What about her husband? Nancy looked at Lena incredulously. Oh, you didn't know. She's always changing lovers like a glove. Just think of the story when she came back from the ski resort. Nancy interrupted her friend. Don't get distracted. What's next? Anyway, she's got some cool new, crazy handsome guy. They say she fell in love like a girl. She's a Wendy herself, bragging about how handsome he is and everything. Me and the girls think she, well, bought him, but it's unclear, of course. Anyway, our aunt is head over heels in love. She has to work every day. She's not even going to the salon with him. So forget it, girl. You ain't gonna get no fines yet. Kelly hasn't been around here in a while. She probably forgot she even had a salon. That's right, Nancy confirmed it. I haven't seen her in a couple weeks. Love her. Oh, that's awful. Her poor husband. Helen brushed it off. Her husband has plenty of mistresses too, I think. Okay, I'm going to run down the hall. I have a client girl almost managed to leave the room, but Nancy stopped her with one unexpected and strange question. Wait. Who is her lover? Helen was taken aback. What do you mean, who? A man. I understand. I mean, where did she meet him? What does he do? Oh, how would I know? Ask Cindy or Corner, but she's not likely to tell you. I don't remember, either a doctor or a masseur. Why? Nancy thought she was doused with gasoline and set on fire with that phrase. No, it's nothing. Just wondering. All right, that's it. I'm off for a kiss. Helen sent an air kiss and disappeared through the doorway. Nancy's breath cleared. It seemed to her that she had forgotten how to breathe properly for masseuses. Could it be that even to herself the girl couldn't say what was swirling around in her mind? Could it be that her creepiest and most disgusting nightmare had come true? No, it was impossible. Nancy was drowning in her own thoughts. It seemed as if the whole world was leaving under her feet. She, as in a fog, approached her bag, shaking hands, took out her cell phone, and already dialed the number of her spouse. As suddenly her mind could not withstand such an emotional shaking, and Nancy collapsed like under the leather present next to the sofa, losing consciousness for a couple of seconds. At the same moment, a not-so-pleasant scene was taking place in Nick's office. I told you no. Nick dodged the arm dragging towards him. Don't touch me, you're interfering with my work. What kind of inaccessible? The commanding voice of a woman lying face down on the massage table was heard. She wiggled, trying to touch her masseur at least a finger, but he rudely stopped her attempts. Don't you like beautiful rich women? Nick took a couple steps back, wringing his hands in shame. How many times do I have to tell you? Kelly, I'm married. The woman got up from the table. Honey, well, I'm aware of that. So what? I'm married too. You're making a big deal out of yourself. You need the money, don't you? I'm married. Nick kept repeating that phrase, storing up the incoming rage. This Kelly client was his punishment. She came to see him every day, or even a couple times a day. And each time, the same scenario played out, actively flirting, hinting to the man for further connection. Flirting languidly tried to induce Nick to cheat. She even offered him money for it. Nick was beyond angry. This woman was only making him gagging with her behavior. And how did she talk about his beloved wife? Sometimes he even wanted to give the scoundrel a good slap. So much so that she pissed off the masseur. but Nick kept quiet. He understood perfectly well that the money that brought him such a client was necessary. With that money, he could pay a month's mortgage and a monthly rent for the studio. Time after time, he had to swallow his discontent. Time after time, he dug his nails into the palms of his hands to the point of pain, and only modestly moved away from the annoying lady, not forgetting to repeat that they were married, that close relations between them were impossible. He, like a madman, repeated the same thing. It won't work out between you and me. I'm married. It won't work out between you and me. I'm married. But Kelly seemed to enjoy this talk. Nick's loyalty to her spouse and moral values only seemed to whet the predator in her. As she had once admitted to Nick herself, she would not back down, no matter what it cost her. Okay, now she laughed as she lay back down on the couch, continuing to work. Nick took a deep breath, exhaling hot air. This client was just impossible. He tried to pull himself together, calmed down, walked over to the massage table and went back to work. Continued doing the hated aunts, the massages. More and more often Nick wondered, is it really worth it? Is this money worth all his humiliation? Deep in his own thoughts, he accidentally squeezed the woman's skin a little harder than necessary. She bent more gently. What am I paying you this kind of money for? Nick rolled his eyes, but in response said sorry, please, and thought to himself, worth the money. It's a job. It's a studio. It's all for my family. He continued to massage, counting the minutes until the session ended. But a frightening and even humiliating thought suddenly popped into his head. What would my father say? Nick tried not to think about it. Pretty soon this massage session would come to an end. Finally, the session was over. Kelly hid behind the partition to change her clothes. Nick was happy that it was over, and now this woman would be leaving the walls of his office. Nick had another client coming in soon, a rather famous soccer player in their town who was injured. At the moment when Nick was checking everything with his schedule, in his notebook, the phone rang. Hello, Nick pressed the button to accept the call. Hello, Nancy. There was a ringing silence coming from the phone. Hello, Nancy. What's wrong? Nick was worried sick. He thought he heard a noise. Hello. He kept yelling into the phone. What are you yelling about? Kelly appeared from behind the partition, buttoning up her red pantsuit. It's your bogeyman calling. Nick, never having waited for an answer, put the phone back on the coffee table. Probably called by accident, he thought, shifting his gaze full of rage to the client. Don't you dare talk about her like that, he said sternly. The session is over. I have another client soon. It's time for you to go. Kelly laughed out loud. Oh, come on. I don't know what she armed you with. She's got no skin, no face. How did a handsome guy like that marry a wire like that? You're wrong. My Nancy's the most beautiful girl in the world, aren't you? He's half-witted. He couldn't afford to lose the money Kelly was bringing in. Do you have to go? At least offer me a coffee. The woman walked around the studio and sat down on the white couch. Who's the client? I'll pay double instead. You can't do that, Nick replied. At that moment, however, he received a text message. He picked up his cell phone in his hands, read the incoming messages. The same athlete who was about to show up for a sports massage session texted that he couldn't make it today. Kelly was next to the masseur. She looked over the man's broad shoulder and read the message. That's great. Do you have some free time? The woman said cheerfully. What shall we do? Do you remember my offer? She smiled predatorily and returned to the embrace of the sofa. I'll pay you well. Nick covered his eyes, thought she was offering good money. He had a distinct feeling that something inside him had broken, something important, something that he had cherished so much all these years. And he said quietly, his head well down, approached the studio door and closed it so that it couldn't be opened with the key on the backside. Nancy woke up, collapsed on the couch in the staff room, looked around. She realized that the realization that her spouse might not be faithful to her had made her faint. She was shaking. No, he couldn't do this to me. She repeated to herself like a mantra. She reached for the phone on the floor. But she was brought out of her panic by Wendy appearing in the doorway. Nancy is a customer, said the receptionist. What's the matter with you? You're not yourself. Ah, Manicure. What if you grabbed your head? I'm just not feeling well right now. What is it, Nancy? Wendy lost her seriousness for a second, and there was a look of concern on her face for her colleague. You've got to pull yourself together. This client's booked up a month in advance. Yeah, now give me a couple seconds. Wendy frowned. Okay, I'll try to keep her distracted for as long as possible, but take your time. I don't know what happened in there, but work is work, let's get cleaned up. I got it. Thanks. Nancy stood up and headed toward the sink nearby, when she suddenly decided to make one thing clear. Wendy was still standing in the doorway of the back room. What's harsh? Asked the receptionist. Is it true that Kelly has a new love, some incredibly handsome man, and that Golly's eyes rolled with anger, but quickly returned to their previous impenetrable state? It's not entirely clear why, but Wendy decided to answer such an inappropriate and even rude question. Appeared yes. She bragged to me nonstop, saying he was handsome, indescribable. She's really in love. That's great. Nancy said it quietly. So, it's true. Her new masseuse, Wendy rolled her eyes. It's true that Kelly had recently met him and was crazy about him. The receptionist shook her head theatrically. Oh, you're a gossip. You have to stick your nose in everything. Okay, well, I'm being nice today, so I'll answer what you're interested in. Yes, she's in love. Yes, there's a freebie coming. No fines. While she's busy with her new boyfriend, you can relax a little. Wendy frowned, but not hard, mindful of his duties. Got it. Nancy replied, deftly understood. I'm going out into the hall now, give me a minute. Come on, hurry up. Nancy washed herself with the icy stream and took a long look at the water flowing down the drain. It seemed to her that life was over. There seemed to be no more point in living. She spent another couple minutes in silence, trying to quiet the trembling in her knees and hands. Thoughts swirled chaotically in her head, and by contrast, there was no emotion left. Nancy took to calming herself down. Maybe it's not my Nick after all. It's not like he's the only masseur in town. Yeah, it's not him. With each such thought, the girl felt a little better. She continued to develop them in a similar fashion. She's old. Nick wouldn't cheat on me with her. Nick wouldn't cheat on me at all. Thought Nancy, calmed down, found the strength to go out into the hall and get to work. Be that as it may, Nancy still had 2 children. Even if her spouse would betray her, one must live at least for them. The workday was coming to an end. She only had 2 clients today, and both were following each other, leaving no break in between. The couple had decided early in the morning that Nancy would pick up the children from school. Here she was about to leave work. She had no more appointments, and there was no point in staying late. No one would be fined. The boss is busy with some man, just as long as it's not mine. Nancy thought to herself, and as she was about to leave work, she decided to check her phone. During the time she had been busy, she had received 2 messages. One was from her husband, and another rather strange one from an unknown subscriber. Probably spam, the girl thought, and was ready to delete the suspicious sums. But first, she wanted to read the first message from Nick. It said, "Honey, I'm going to be late today. I have a couple of clients tonight. Don't worry, everything's fine. See you at home, kisses." After reading her heart's message, Nancy missed a couple of thuds. The feeling of anxiety that had accompanied Nancy lately behind creeped with renewed vigor, and the sense of impending trouble hit her head. Again he was delayed. The resentment swept over her more than usual. He's fallen out of love with me. With pain in her heart, she thought. Nancy twirled the phone in her hands. She remembered the second that strange message. Wanted to delete it without reading it, but something made her still look at her forehead. Drops of sweat came out as she realized that there was a picture attached to the message. She slowly poked at the screen and opened the message. Her heart, she thought, had stopped forever. She was no longer capable of living in this world. She was no longer capable of loving. Her soul was sucked into a black mark and slime. Her head spun and her hands treacherously shook, and her smartphone clattered down the screen onto the stone slab. The photo that the unknown person had sent was of Nick, completely naked. Apparently, caught red-handed in the frame, he, like Zhukov in January, was frozen in it forever. Accompanying the photo, the message read, "Now he's mine." Though Nancy dropped the phone from her hands, she memorized those lines for the rest of her life. He's cheating on me with her," thought the unhappy girl, pouring bitter tears. His mistress's face was not visible in that photograph, but there was an important detail. Next to a completely naked Nick, her boss's bag was lying carelessly on the ground. Obviously, the frame was deliberately arranged so that the unhappy wife would realize exactly with whom she had been cheated. Nancy picked up the phone, examined it. Shattered. She noted. Without a single emotion, the girl tossed it idly into her bag, walked out of the now hated beauty parlor. She walked like a ghost, ignoring her coworkers who were saying goodbye to her, and wanted to have a few words with her. Walking, ignoring the world, immersed in her own pain. Nancy walked along the highway. Hot and bitter tears ran down her cheek. It seemed to her that those tears consisted of a thick black mass of the shit that had settled in her soul forever. Betrayal and betrayal of her lover had been her worst nightmares. And now those nightmares had come true. Could it be that we really do bring into our lives what we think about most often? Either way, now Nancy needed to think about how to rebuild herself after her heart had been shattered to pieces. She didn't need this for her own sake, but only for the sake of her children. Nancy walked, trying to calm herself down before meeting the children. Nick no longer existed for her. Now he was just like that in that horrible picture. And in life, still is dead. That night, Nancy, quickly picking up the children, left the apartment where she had lived with her husband for the past 6 years. She hastily threw the children and her belongings into a suitcase and stormed out of the apartment. Now a new life awaited Nancy. At first she thought about waiting for Nick to come home from work and working things out with him. She imagined looking him straight in the eye, imagining asking, "Why did you do this to me?" Nancy imagined looking sadly and longingly at the man she had once loved, who was now a stranger to her. But she couldn't stay. She didn't want to endure all that pain and humiliation again. Nancy left her home, trying to forget everything that had happened forever. She didn't want to think about Nick anymore. No longer wanted to think about how she had been treated. She felt like Nick had just been replaced by the old Nick. He couldn't have done that to her. The man who had sworn his loyalty to her would never cheat on the one he loved. That's not him anymore. Nancy rented an apartment. The city she'd been living in lately wasn't her hometown, and she had nowhere else to go. Borrowing money from her friends, she was able to afford a small studio apartment on the very outskirts of the city. She was no longer interested in the city center. Nancy wasn't going to show up for work anymore. She didn't need the proximity to the studio her now ex-husband had rented. Nancy told the kids that Daddy was just away on a job, said their family was struggling financially and now needed to save more money. This was generally true. Nancy had not yet found a new job, and the main income was lost. The girl did not want to see her husband ever again. She had even changed her phone number so Nick wouldn't find her. Picked up her kids the same day from her old school and daycare. Changed her whole life. Time passed, but the heart of the betrayed wife continued to ache with the same intensity. Her eldest son Tom asked his mother why she was so sad, but she kept coming up with excuses. One day the boy got to the bottom of it and asked if it was because of Daddy. Yeah, but Nancy shook her head no. No, sweet Daddy had nothing to do with it. I'm just a little sad, the mother replied, trying not to cry. Ever since the day Nancy left the apartment, Nick had been trying to find her. He called, he wrote, he looked for her through friends and acquaintances. But Nancy hadn't made contact. He couldn't know that she had locked herself away in her new apartment like a recluse and wouldn't let anyone near her. She barely answered calls and messages from friends of those she did give her new number to. She didn't even answer her own mother when she called to ask how she was doing. The days passed from one day to the next, and Nancy tried her best to get back into shape, but it wasn't working out well. One day, as she was going through the things she'd managed to pick up from her old house on site, she came across her keys. The very copy of the keys to the studio where her husband worked. She had the strange idea to show up at Nick's office unexpectedly and catch him red-handed and cause a real scandal. The woman, who had changed into a roe, spoke softly. Maybe she's found someone else. Why are you so worried? You'll find a prettier, richer woman. By the way, this woman is much closer than you think. Shut up, shouted Nick in response. But okay, quietly replied Kelly, lying down on the couch during a massage. She began to think of a new plan of action. Bit by bit, little by little, Nancy was getting significantly better. She returned to her normal life and even answered her mother and friends' numerous phone calls. Life went on, no matter how it was, and Nancy, after seeing her children off to a new garden and a new school, sat down at her old laptop to find a new job. There were no suitable vacancies. The manicure master already had time to think that it would be possible to return to her hometown together with her children. As suddenly her cell phone suddenly rang, called from an unknown number, and she frowned, thinking that Nick called from another phone. But something made her answer the call. Hello, I'm listening. Wrapped up with a heart, she answered. Hello, Nancy. Hi, it's Adriana. Remember her? Wendy gave me your number. She told me you quit. How come? You know I only want my handyman. Nancy smiled warmly, delighted by the unexpected call. Hello, yes, I quit. Unfortunately, I won't be able to see you. Try to make an appointment with Irina. She's an excellent specialist. Nancy, the woman sighed heavily. You don't understand, it's you I want to see. For the first time in a long time, Nancy felt a warmth developing in her chest. She was insanely pleased to hear that. Maybe she was worth something after all. I'm glad to hear it, she replied, clamping the phone between her ear and shoulder. But I have no place to perceive. I don't have my own toolbox. Oh, honey, would you go back to work for me for once? Wendy said all the girls would love to see you. I'll pay good money. Adriana, you know, Nancy was silent for a while. You see, I can't go back to that salon. I can't, and I don't want to. Kelly, is she interested? The woman asked. She's not here anyway, and I'm going to make sure she's not. I promise. Well, you'll come and tell me what happened. Maybe I can help. Nancy thought about going into the den of the woman who stole her man. No way in hell. I mean, the money was worth it. And if Kelly didn't do well there, Nancy replied confidently. Just for you, Nancy arrived at the hated beauty parlor at the appointed time as promised by Adriana. Kelly was not there. Nancy wondered what influence she had. She spoke to her coworkers, explaining her sudden departure from work. Listened to the sympathetic speeches. All the girls were in complete shock at the insolence of their boss. After receiving her share of support, Nancy waited for Adriana and got to work. What's up? Read as always. Nancy, you know me. The usual. Thanks for coming for me, you're welcome. Nancy smiled warmly and began to remove the old coatings. Adriana looked at her master for a long time and finally decided to ask. So why did you quit? May I ask? Did you have some kind of problem with your boss? Nancy was silent for a while, analyzing the situation, and then thought, what difference does it make? So she started telling Adriana everything that had happened to her. The woman was completely shocked. She listened to the whole story literally with her mouth open. Her eyes rounded, and her tone became lower. Are you sure about this? Do you have any proof? Nancy glanced at the client. Sure, 100%. Proof? Alas, no. I accidentally smashed my phone when I saw that photo. But it's definitely her. There can be no doubt. Adriana's deep in thought. If you present them to me, I can help you. Present you with proof that my husband is sleeping with my boss. Nancy asked uncertainly. But why? I won't say sorry yet. A little time had passed, and now Nancy's sadness was replaced by more negative feelings. She wanted revenge. She wanted to tear and throw. She wanted to grab her student by the hair and drag her all over town by it. The longing turned into real rage, the rage of a betrayed and unhappy woman. There was no way Nick could find his place. He did not understand why exactly his spouse had treated him so badly. He called all his friends, acquaintances. To each of them he went personally. Little did he know, maybe Nancy and the children were hiding somewhere with them. His heart was broken and tugged with pain. Why? Why had she left? Nick couldn't find a reason. Maybe I wasn't giving her enough time. He thought, maybe I'd done something wrong. There was no answer to these questions. And Nick, who didn't know what the right thing to do was, tried all the options. He stood outside his daughter's kindergarten for hours, trying to see a familiar face in the crowd. He had also idled at the main entrance to his son's school. He could not go there at all, but there was no one there. His heart was bleeding. When he thought about losing his family forever, Nick had even managed to take a trip to Nancy's hometown. Suddenly, she took the kids and went to her mom's house. But his wife's mother-in-laws and sisters-in-law only shrugged and cried. "We can't find her ourselves," they replied. Nick was tearing up and throwing up with misunderstanding. After all, if Nancy had fallen out of love with him, why was she hiding the children? If Nancy fell in love with another man, why not just say so? That fact was driving him mad. He had almost stopped sleeping. Deep wrinkles appeared under his eyes. His hands were shaking and his legs were tweaking. After a while, Nick still had to go back to work. Clients were waiting for him more than ever. He called all his regulars, announcing that he was ready to start work again. Quite expected. The first person to see him was her. "Oh my God, Nick." Kelly rushed over to the masseuse. She theatrically shook her hands. "What happened to you? Why do you look like that?" She tried to hug him, but the man roughly pushed her away. The woman almost collapsed to the floor and looked at the masseur for the first time. With a tinge of fear, "What do you allow yourself?" She was indignant. "Piss off." Nick replied rudely. "I've said 100 times that nothing will ever happen between us. And now I'm not in the mood for you. If you don't like it, get out. I don't care if you leave and never come back." Kelly was taken aback. She nervously tucked a gray strand of hair behind her ear. Her hands shook slightly. Never before had anyone dared to speak to her like that. What on earth does this boy allow himself, taking himself in hand? She replied stiffly, "And you don't talk to me like that. I want to, and your whole business will be shut down." "Right. Don't you dare talk back to me." "Let's go," shouted Nick back. "I don't care anymore." Kelly felt a pang of rage, but a look into his sad green eyes melted away. "What a handsome devil, huh?" she thought, but out loud she said softened, all right, calm down. What happened there? Did you quarrel with your street?" And with these words she hid behind a partition in the hole. She knew the answer perfectly well. After all, it was she who quarreled faithful spouses. The woman sent a provocative photo to her subordinate. She wanted the latter, thinking that her spouse was not faithful to her, to leave him. She thought that when the spouses separated, the masseur would no longer be so strict and would succumb to her charms. However, Nick was still categorically conventional. What had she done wrong? Nancy left suddenly answered Nick, barely holding back tears. "I don't understand what I did wrong. Why did she leave me?" "Why?" He shouted, rather, addressing not to the client, but somewhere in the sky. "I don't understand why," he repeated quietly to Nana. "I wish I had a picture or a video. Then I could put Nadia in her place. Trust me, I have a lot of influence over her." Thinking about how you can get them, Nancy was stunned. "I don't get it," thought to herself, but what beauty. Adriana admired, looking at her nails. "You're a clever girl. If you can't find proof, call me anyway. I'll find you new good spots." "Okay," Nancy replied uncertainly and hurriedly left the salon. Why would Adriana want proof that Kelly was sleeping with Nick? Nancy couldn't understand it. In any case, she wanted some kind of revenge for the separation. And if Adriana could help with that, why not take that chance? Besides, Nancy already had a plan. She borrowed money from Adriana and used it to buy a nice tiny security camera to hang in her husband's beleaguered office. Thankfully, she still had the keys to the studio. I studied the instructions for the device. Fortunately, it was not so difficult. Early in the morning, when there were certainly no appointments, she sneaked into Nick's office. The studio was on the first floor of an ordinary apartment building, and there was no security alarm system. Set up the camera so it wouldn't be noticeable, connected it to hers. But then now all that was left to do now was wait. She knew that Kelly came to Nick for a massage every day. All day long Nancy, games for nerves all over her fingernails, languished in anticipation. Late at night, unable to stand it, Nick's look was lost and pained. Nancy thought with pain in her chest, "I hope he doesn't drink." She looked at her husband and realized with each new minute that she had never been able to fall out of love with him. "Pull yourself together," shouted Nancy to herself. Slightly hitting his own cheek with the palm of his hand, "He cheated on you, cheated," to the masseur, then came the clients one by one. But nothing untoward was happening there. The usual standard massage. Nancy had already had time to think. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe her husband wasn't cheating on her, and it was just some stupid misunderstanding. But then the thing she'd been waiting for happened. Kelly walked into the office. Nancy, making sure the camera not only played back, but also recorded everything on the memory card, watched with pain in her heart. It started out standard, nothing much happened. "Nancy, you cranked the audio up to maximum and was horrified by what you heard." The moment Nick massaged the client, she started talking. "So, you still haven't made up your mind. What kind of a homo are you?" "I guess I can't wait any longer. I want you." "Your dumb ass left you a long time ago." "Why are you still breaking?" "Because I only love her." Nick answered calmly, not stopping to massage her. "And you disgust me." "I don't know why she left me, but I never love her." Nancy's heart skipped a couple beats. "Didn't he cheat on me?" A new hope settled in her heart. Left ear became more than a little angry. She jumped up from the table in the middle of nowhere and started screaming. "She left because I set you up. You idiot." She lamented her father's separation, covering her breasts with one hand. "Remember the day you agreed to that nude photo shoot? I set you up. I set it up so your Nancy would think you were cheating on her. I sent her a picture of you so she'd think we were having an affair and dump you. She's already left you. Forget her." And with those words, Kelly threw herself into the man's arms, trying to kiss him. He jerked his whole body like an electric shock and pushed her away from him. Kelly fell awkwardly to the floor, but did not stop trying. That's when Nick finally became enraged, grabbed her under her arms, and shoved her out the door, throwing her clothes at her. "We're never going to have anything. I'm sick of it. Get out of here," he shouted as the doors slammed shut in her face. Sitting at the monitor, Nancy couldn't believe what had happened. She seemed to have learned to breathe again. He didn't cheat on me gladly, she thought. Grabbing the memory card with the recording, she rushed to her husband's studio. On the way, she managed to call Adriana in time to give her the tape. Nancy wasn't sure if such proof would do the trick, but the woman assured Nancy it was even better, and taking the memory card from her, told her to wait. Nancy burst into the massage parlor and immediately threw herself at her husband's neck. "I knew it. I knew you would never do this to me." She screamed with joy. That evening, the different spouses, having cleared up all the loose ends, were reunited. Nancy returned home with the children. All was well. But still, Adriana needed that video. As it turned out, Kelly had never owned a beauty parlor. She was the director of a whole chain of salons, and the real owners and founders were siblings Adriana and Leo, Kelly's husband. At the very beginning of their business together, Leo had suggested his wife Hope as director. Adriana had never really liked Nadia. They had all been friends since their college years, but Adriana had long known that Nadia was a shameless and unscrupulous woman and completely unworthy of her impecunious husband. Thanks to Nancy, Adriana managed to prove to her brother what his wife was really like. As a result, Leo divorced Hope, of course, firing her from her former position as director of beauty salons. Adriana offered Nancy to take her place, but the girl refused for fear of responsibility. Then she was offered another option. They were opening a new salon in the suburbs, and Nancy was offered to be the director of not a chain, but only one point. After consulting with her husband, Nancy agreed, so the family moved to the countryside. Of course, when Nancy became a director, she abandoned the system of fines once and for all. She recruited a good team of professionals, and soon her salon became the best of the entire chain. Nick opened a new massage parlor and quickly gained other clients. The clientele was doing even better here than downtown. Nancy and Nick never needed money again. And 2 years later, their family had another baby boy. After all that happened, the couple learned the most important thing. Never lie to each other. Always discuss what happened and trust each other as much as possible.
Subscribe and click the bell.
Diana often thought that her future was predetermined in advance. Some people are given everything by fate, although they don't seem to do anything special for it. Others struggle like a fish against the ice all their lives and are small. Hard-won successes are replaced by a series of failures, disappointments, and sometimes even real disasters. Diana's family lived in the village. Her mother, a young graduate of the village school, was abused by drunken scumbags on the night of her graduation. Her former classmates. Anna was the prettiest girl in school. She had a lush blue dress made for the party. By morning, it was just rags. Anna wanted to kill herself. The first person to see her was Principal William. He stayed at the school until the last minute. A gala dinner was served for the boys in their own dining room. Then, of course, there was dancing. At the end of the day, everyone went out to see the sunrise. It was only then that William parted from the graduates. It was like a sign. They were adults and didn't need a review. And the principal went through the empty school, turned out the lights, and went home. He lived quite far from the school on the other side of the village. He had a car, but he didn't use it much, unless he needed to go to town. But the bicycle became a faithful friend. William was still young. He'd just turned 30. And now he was pedaling, enjoying the morning coolness, admiring the early dawn. He was not far from his home when he heard a soft crying, a thin voice. It was a child or a girl crying. William jumped off his bike, realizing at once that there was trouble. The sobs were too bitter for him to hear. Yet he had not expected this. Anna was sitting on the grass with her arms around her knees in her dress. Her face in dirt and bloody streaks her nose was smashed. Anna was shaking. And never before had William heard such a desperate, hopeless executioner. The principal sat down next to the graduate. No one ever found out what they whispered about that bright hour. It was only morning when the three scumbags met in the latrine. Lived on the edge of the village, an alcoholic LX. He was about 50 years old, and he was attracted to the paratroopers in the village because, drunk, he told everyone that he had once served in the paratroopers, and he was almost sent to Vietnam, where he would undoubtedly show everyone. And saying goodbye, Alex would raise his palm to his temple and say, "I have the honor." So Alex lived on the outskirts in a hut, collapsed and in a cesspool. Up to his neck in frequencies sat sobered up. The guys on the edge of the pit were Alex and William. Alex had a shotgun because, among other things, he was also an avid hunter. And every once in a while he would point the barrels at one of the guys and command, duck, and shoot, and really fire his 2 barrels just over their heads. And to stay alive you had to dive in the dumpster hole. By the time the trio had lost the appearance of humanity, William told them to pack up the house and the rest of the village for good. Kindly, the police should have been called to start an investigation. There were examinations and a trial and a deadline, but Anna begged not to make the case public. She prayed to God that no one would know what had happened to her, to avoid the shame. So 2 men went on a lynching spree. Rapists. After that, indeed, no one was ever seen in the village again. But somehow the village found out what had happened. Alex swore it wasn't him talking. He wouldn't even tell anyone drunk. Most likely, the guys shared it with their relatives before leaving. On the one hand, their loved ones should have been grateful that the punishment was limited to just a shameful bathing out of purity, and that the punishment was fair. Neither could anyone deny it. Anna had always been characterized by modesty. No one would dare say that she herself was to blame for what had happened. On the other hand, the boys' parents had definitely lost their sons forever. They couldn't go back. William warned that in this case, prison would be inevitable. But even though the scumbags got their payback, Anna still didn't want to live. Her faith in people in her future was all trampled. And then the villagers had to aghast a second time. William married his former student. It all happened kind of fast. He proposed, she accepted. Instead of a wedding, They just signed at the registry office. No sit down, no guests. And it happened that Anna got pregnant almost immediately and gave birth to a daughter prematurely. Diana took after her father. It was visible to the naked eye. Strangers noticed how much she resembled William, but the villagers believed that the girl was the daughter of one of the boys who had abused her mother. They even wondered if she was from Nick, Frank, or Andrew. Anna asked her husband to do an examination, but he refused flatly. "I don't want to go along with silly rumors to prove anything to them," he said. "Besides, even if I reproduce the certificate that I am Diana's father in 100 copies and hang it on the wall in every house, people will keep saying what they want. They like it that way. I don't mind, I'll get over it." William did everything he could for his young wife. Under his supervision, Anna graduated from the pedagogical college by correspondence, began to work at school as an elementary school teacher, and they had a nice house and both loved to work in the garden. And on a long teacher's vacation, they went to the sea with their little daughter. And no one said anything to their eyes, neither they nor William. In front of them, everyone pretended that they had long forgotten the story. But when Diana grew up, she realized that everyone remembered what had happened to her mother. A girlfriend told her. It was a great shock for Diana, but the sensitive girl understood her mother better not to question her, not to cause her additional pain. Diana noticed, and that her parents forbid their children to be friends with her. She's on the street bad heredity. The principal is raising someone else's child. The girl will grow up to be just like her real father, drinking, whoring. She heard it behind her back, and though William was fond of his daughter, it could not overshadow the alienation of those around him. By the time Diana graduated from high school, her family had 2 more sons growing up. No one had any doubts about them. And Diana realized now that she was back on her feet, she had to leave. Her mother is behind her father like a stone wall, and she herself has no place in this village, where every family's lineage is known to the 10th knee. Here you can't get married, marry, or live anything. And after the graduation party, Diana packed up and left for the city. Her parents found it natural. It is necessary to study further. But the girl hid her plans from them. Institute is, of course, great, but she wanted to get on her feet as soon as possible. And she went to study at hairdressing courses. And at the same time found a job, got a job in the park to ride children on horses, to take care of the horses, to put the kids on them, to lead under the reins around the circle. Having grown up in the village, the girl knew how to use horses. She was not afraid of them, and she was taken to this place without a second thought. The pay was not much, but her parents sent her enough money to rent a room and live very frugally. In her dreams, she had already planned her life. She would graduate from the course and get a job in some salon. Surely there the earnings will be higher. First of all, Diana will get her hand in, as they say. Secondly, if she saved every penny, she would be able to buy everything she needed to open her own hairdressing salon. Then Diana planned to go to the district center, where it would be possible to rent premises inexpensively. There's a shortage of barbers in the neighborhood. There will always be work, and my parents are close by. You can visit them whenever you miss them. She hadn't thought about marriage yet. It seemed to her that everything is still ahead of her, and you need to first get on your feet. The girls she knew were having affairs, living with one boy and another. But they rarely invited her to the wedding, unless one of her friends realized she was pregnant, and then the young couple would apply. The rest wanted to have time to travel the world, build a career, fall in love more than once, and just to not bury themselves in a maelstrom of domestic responsibilities. But as they say, a man assumes and God disposes. In the park on the same platform with Diana began to work Thomas. And the girl herself did not notice how between them first friendship, and then a closer relationship. Apparently, Diana lacked warmth, having left her family in a foreign city so early. She felt lonely. Things were different with Thomas. The young man had his own apartment, even if it was just a one-bedroom and not in a prestigious neighborhood. But it was still a home, and Thomas was happy to share it with Diana. He also suggested the girl to sign. Now the two of them would come to the park in the early morning to work on the horses. Thomas was a veterinary paramedic, and Diana learned a lot from him. The summer flashed by unnoticed. At the end of August, the young people were married. Diana thought about inviting her parents to the wedding, even if it was a modest one. But Thomas talked her out of it. They decided to set the table at home, invite their closest friends, so that they would not be in a hurry, so that no one would make remarks to them. However, it could not be avoided. Thomas's friends were smoking and talking loudly in the stairwell at midnight. So the neighbor flew out for a scandal. But in general, the evening was successful, and most importantly, they managed to save a lot of money. Thomas persuaded Diana to quit her job and finish her studies in peace. It'll be fall soon anyway. There'll be a lot less visitors to the park. He'll be fine on his own. Diana hesitated. Earning money would give her some autonomy. She would be completely dependent on her husband, but fate had decided for her. Diana realized she was pregnant. She knew from her friends that in many cases you can work until the maternity leave. But this was not her option. First of all, she could not get any maternity pay at such a job. Secondly, the smell of the stables made her nauseous, dizzy, and her eyes dark. Diana was admitted to the hospital for a short period of time and was discharged with a recommendation to treat herself as a fragile crystal vase. To rest more. No heavy loads, walks in the fresh air, vegetables and fruit in the diet. As fall came, Thomas also began to bring in less money than in the summer. He started looking for part-time work, traveling to calls, treating animals at home. If the cases were uncomplicated, and with Diana he began to quarrel. Returning, Thomas himself stopped by the store for groceries. He liked to save money and was a virtuoso at it. Diana knew that such a husband would not leave you hungry. He made soup out of an axe. She used to like it, but now she often realized that she could not bring herself to eat this or that dish. Pea soup and sugar cubes disgusted her. Thomas, on the other hand, was angry that his wife had turned into a snowflake and could not be pleased. Once Diana asked for chocolate ice cream. That day she was feeling particularly unwell, lying on the sofa, trying to move as little as possible. She wanted to eat, but she could feel it. The only thing her body could take was popsicles. Thomas, on the other hand, had brought her the cheapest ice cream. Diana cried out in frustration, and her husband was furious with her. "I'm sick of you." He threw the plate with the ice cream at his wife. "You lie around like a cow all day doing nothing, and everyone owes you everything." Known to be resentful and unstable at times by women who are expecting a child, Diana was sobbing and couldn't stop. The hour was late, and the room was alone. Thomas had nowhere to go, and he could not hear the crying any longer. He rushed to Diana, began to beat her head against the table, repeating, "Shut up, shut up, shut up." From pain and fear, she could only cry softly. That time she forgave her husband. But Thomas apparently realized that it was okay to raise a hand on his wife. And the next time she aroused his irritation, he simply pushed Diana away. So she flew across the room and banged her thigh painfully against the corner of the table. A huge bruise blossomed on her leg. "What are you doing?" Diana asked bitterly. "You can't hit me now." "Oh, come on." Thomas sounded contemptuous. "Who's hitting you? You can see anyone." When was the next time he raised his hand to her? Diana ineptly tried to fight back, and such fights, ending in violence, began to happen between them more and more often. Diana tried to go to her friends, complained to them. They consoled her, advised her to leave Thomas without looking back. "Where would I go?" Diana asked. "I don't have a place to live. To go back to my parents without a husband, pregnant. Can't you imagine what kind of life awaits me there? Everyone will point fingers." This is the 21st century in the city, and such cases are normal. And there I'll just lock myself up and stay at home. There was no friend who could take Diana in. One has her own family. The second lives with her parents. The third rents an apartment. I'll be patient. What to do? Diana sighed. Maybe when the baby is born, everything will change. But Diana's baby was not destined to be born. The pregnancy was terminated prematurely. It wasn't Thomas' fault directly. Diana was home alone when she felt sick. Then the emergency room and the loss of the baby. The doctors consoled her. "You are still so young. Take 18 years off, rest for a year, then get pregnant and everything will be fine. Thomas didn't come to pick up his wife from the hospital. He was working that day. When he came home, Diana realized that he had no compassion for her. He didn't see anything special in what had happened. Perhaps he thought it was for the best. And we don't need a child now, he concluded. The apartment is small, there's not a penny. When you get a specialty, go to work. Then we'll see. In the shower. Diana hoped that her husband had learned a lesson from what had happened. He couldn't have been unimpressed by it all. And if he raised his hand against her next time, it could end even more tragically. But as it turned out, the husband hadn't come to any conclusions. And if Diana annoyed him in any way, his fists itched. And this was a time when a young woman needed to come to her senses in every sense. The medics would speculate about hormones, the psychiatrist would hint at depression. And the first big fight had tragic consequences. It was Friday night. Thomas in his dreams imagined a set table, some appetizers, and most importantly, plenty of beer. And after that, having come to a relaxed state, it would be possible to watch a good fight check, and then fall asleep to it. He had told his wife in the morning that he would organize a feast in the evening. The weather was very bad, dreary rain and cold, cold and rain. We should do something to make ourselves happy. But when he got home, the refrigerator was empty, as they say in a popular TV show. There was no mayonnaise and no iron bars. Why haven't you gone to the store yet? Did you go to the wife? Diana tried to explain. Not to the store. I paid the rent. And then I had a really bad headache today. I went to the pharmacy and got some medicine. The pennies don't work for me. I took the cheapest one that was effective, but there was still no money left. There's a packet of pasta. I didn't boil it for you. It's 15 minutes, and then it's hot for you. Got any melted cheese? It'll be macaroni and cheese, like in Italy. Like in Italy, you say. Thomas started freaking out. What did I tell you? I'm supposed to eat this stupid food now. And take your pills for dessert. The idea of taking money from whoever you want and whatever you want. It's not my fault you make so little money. Trying to snap at Diana, so pick up your part of the couch and go to work. Finally broke Thomas. You're a nobody you know. And you're not a good hostess. You can't take care of yourself, and you couldn't even be a mother. Diana burst into tears, and Thomas grabbed her by the hair so that he almost scalped her. Stop whining. I can't take your whining all day. What the hell do I need you for? Diana ran out into the entryway and sat in a corner under the stairs until late at night. It was dark and cold, but no one could see her, and she could cry until she got out. It was a good thing the door to the house was left unlocked. The young woman made her way in when Thomas was already asleep. But that dark and bitter evening, something irrevocably changed in Diana. The next day, she went to her parents' house. They greeted her affectionately, but she noticed that the family had already adjusted to life without her. The younger brothers were studying with their mother, and their father had his own affairs and worries. They told Diana about them, but they were their own affairs and they did not concern her. What they did know about the daughter, however, was that she had married and moved in with her husband. She did not go into details of the case. So as not to upset the closest people and everything that concerned her health, she hid too. She saw that her father and mother were doing well. Her mother said that Diana's brother had already started seeing a girl and would bring her home. A new family will be formed, and there would be grandchildren. Diana nodded. She understood that she should be happy, but her heart was bitter, as if she was all alone in the world. This time, she especially tenderly said goodbye to her loved ones, hugged everyone, told them that she loved them. And she added to herself that she was sorry if she was guilty. When she got home, she waited until Thomas left for work. She gathered up all the pills. What were in the house, poured them in handfuls, drank them, washed them down with milk from a bottle. Diana deliberately left the door open so no one would have to break it down. That's what saved her. 2 women knocked. They needed to read the meter. The door was ajar. The women entered, distracting the owners, and saw Diana lying on the floor. An ambulance took the young woman to the hospital. But for several more days, doctors could not guarantee a favorable outcome. The risk was too great that Diana, even if she survived, would never fully recover. This time, Thomas was really scared. Maybe not so much for his wife as for himself. If he was to be blamed for her death, he called Diana's parents. And the first thing the young woman saw when she came to her senses was her father and mother crying. The father looked very old, and the mother felt immensely guilty. Anna did not leave her daughter's side for the first time, because Diana felt very bad. She had hallucinations. As soon as she took her head off the pillow, she began to feel dizzy. So much so that the young woman would have fits of sickness. You, Diana, have forgotten many words. You could hardly remember them. Sometimes you substituted words that didn't make sense at all, and many everyday skills were erased from her memory. Her mother had to teach her how to eat with a spoon, how to dress herself. Trying to give her daughter back some mental strength, Mother talked about the path she had traveled herself. I didn't want to live either, she said, after what those scumbags did to me. And if it hadn't been for your father, who knows if I would be alive now or if I would have killed myself. Mom, can you tell me the truth? Not to other people, not to Dad, just to me. I need to know. Dad, he really is my father. Tell me the truth. I didn't doubt it for a second. Anna answered firmly. I would not be afraid to go to any examination. Look in the mirror. Your eyes are the same. And the pride is not the same, and he can't stand to be pitied. You used to clash, little one. I reached out to pet you, to soothe you, to blow on your sore spot. And you fell down quickly. You go under the table somewhere. Don't touch me was the only way they'd calm down. If they leave you alone, your father's the same way. And William asked his daughter, tell me what happened. Was it Thomas's fault? Is it because of him that you took this step? Just a hint, and I'll deal with him. You'll put him back in the latrine. Diana sighed tiredly. No, I just need to pull myself together and take charge of my own life. Maybe you'll come home, her father asked hopefully. Diana had never been able to admit that her parents' home had never become her home. Maybe if, when the tragedy happened to her mother, her father had not decided to stay in the same village against all odds, but had taken the young mother to a place where no one knew them, things would have gone differently. But Mama had grown accustomed to the rumors and gossip. Or maybe they had died down over time. Either way, she was content with her fate. Diana, however, realized that she had to start all over again. Fortunately, the head doctor called somewhere, and Diana was taken to the psychoneurological dispensary for another month after discharge. She liked it there. At the hospital, the nurses rate her out as if she was the only one to blame for everything. But here, with souls as grief-stricken as Diana, it was impossible. Diana came in here early in the morning. It was cold outside and right off the corner. But here it was warm and quiet, as if in a kindergarten. The patients were given breakfast, which always included a sweet treat, chocolate-covered cookies. You could pour yourself some hot water and make tea. Then the women gathered in the recreation room. There were lots of live plants here. There were palm trees and rollers. The windowsill was littered with flowers. Green branches tied along the walls and behind graceful pots. Here even equipped a mini corner, the blue crystal of the aquarium glowed mysteriously. The canaries were counting and pouring arrows. All this relaxed and soothed the nurse-invited patients for injections. After receiving their share of antidepressants, some women were going home, with their husband and children waiting for them. Others went to their rooms to rest. Diana almost always exercised this right and stayed at the dispensary until the nursing staff had gone home. The head doctor talked to her and found that Diana had completely good prospects to recover. How is your course of study going? He asked. I've abandoned everything, she said with a guilty smile. You understand marriage failed pregnancy, then all that. The doctor looked at her without judgment, but with sympathy. Yes, there are circumstances in life that force us to abandon our plans. But in your case, it's a temporary measure. You realize you're young and you need to get a profession. Your depression is too closely related to your low grades. You subconsciously realize that you deserve better treatment from your husband for a better life than the one you are living now. But at the same time, your mind says no specialty, no income. So you have to accept what you have now. And this contradiction drives you into a maelstrom of longing and hopelessness. I understand, Diana said quietly. Yes, you're right. I'll try to finish my studies and recover. But good. Now the doctor was smiling. In 3 weeks, your treatment with us will be over. Try to keep it together. If you feel that you are experiencing the same condition as before, you should definitely contact a specialist. We will help you. But don't experiment with medications anymore. You've already been miraculously pulled from the dead. Tell me, do you regret what you did? I do, Diana answered to say something. In fact, in her heart she wasn't sure at all. She had to start from scratch again. And she had so little strength. If things ended the way she planned, she wouldn't have to worry about anything else. I'm writing you some more medications. The doctor has sketched out a prescription. But take them carefully because the effect is cumulative. Diana came home, calmly cooked a light supper, and went to bed early. Thomas behaved decently, didn't try to shout at her, didn't let his hands loose. Or maybe she herself was seeing through the smoke. After all, she'd been sedated so much. Diana left the dispensary with great regret. Now, she had lost the quiet haven in which she had been accustomed to spend the whole day. She decided to call her parents tomorrow and ask them to lend her some money. She would finish the course, start working, and pay them back. Diana was sure that Thomas would not give her any money for her studies. The longer they lived together, the more greedy he became. In his mind, Diana should be busy with housework, should show miracles of economy and not demand too much. Maybe he subconsciously realized that if she found a good place, she would earn more than him. She would run away from the kind of life he had set her up with. Diana decided to call home in the evening so her parents would be home, but she didn't have time. William reached his daughter on his own. "Mom is dead," he said. Diana slowly sank down on the bed. She realized that her father was broken. Usually, no matter what was happening in the family, he kept the opposite. With all his appearance, tried to show that nothing terrible had happened, reassured those around him. And if he had any self-control at all, he would never have told her the news without preparation. But I guess he didn't have any mental strength left. What happened? That's all she asked. Diabetes, father sobbed. Diana had never seen him cry. Mom had diabetes. Shocked? She asked. Imagine that. She hid it from everyone. Only the paramedic at the hospital knew and my mom. And then she went to her neighbor. She was seeing her son off to the army. I don't know what she ate or drank. I was sent to a teacher's conference. I wasn't home for a few days. My mom must have run out of medicine. And she was stupid enough not to call an ambulance. The guys got home late. They thought she was asleep. But in the morning, they looked over and the father was crying. I'll come, Diana said. Nothing's running late today. Tomorrow morning. Come, the funeral's the day after tomorrow. I know the women are already here. They'll do everything. You have nothing to worry about, but just be good to me. And stay with your mom. I know she'll love you more than any of the kids. Can't be shocked, said Diana. I mean, she must have heard from all sides that I wasn't your daughter. But Anna and I knew the truth. On the contrary, she thought she had ruined your life. Couldn't keep you from gossiping that you might be afraid of her. Didn't want to live in the same house. That's why she let you go to town. But she had a hard time with that. And I'll be there. Diana kept crying on the first flight out tomorrow. Daddy, you hang in there. Her native village, though it had a bus connection with the city, but only 3 times a day there was a shuttle bus. And it was packed to the gills. But Diana had no luck at all. The day after the brief thaw, there was a terrible ice storm. And the flights were canceled altogether. Young lady, how am I going to get there now? Diana asked the cashier at the bus station. The question was purely rhetorical. It was clear that the cashier could not help her. I have a funeral to go to, Diana added. In her heart of hearts, she didn't hope for anything. The cashier shrugged. Call a cab. Maybe someone would be willing to drive. I don't think so. I can imagine how many accidents there will be today and how many people won't be able to get to work. It's the first time I've ever seen ice like this. Diana thought it must be even worse in their village. Here at least the janitors sprinkle sand on the roads, but in their village streets and alleys it must be a pure skating rink. It was possible to call a cab on the mobile app. But Diana decided to walk down the street to the small square. There was also the bus terminus. That's where the cab drivers always hung out. She didn't have enough money. If she took a private driver, she didn't know. Maybe in this weather he'd charge double. What do we do then? Diana's only valuables are a gold wedding ring and a cell phone. To get to her parents' house, she was willing to give up both. Immersed in her thoughts, Diana lost for a moment the caution, the concentration, the strength that is necessary when walking on a slippery path. She fell instinctively, putting out her arms for support, and cried out in pain, hitting herself very hard. Not immediately was she able to move her arm. In classic stories, the girl is sure to turn her foot. Immediately a knight is announced, who in his arms carries her to the bus stop, to the house, to the doctor. Substitute the right option for the prophet. It doesn't say anything. But Diana's arm was just as bad, and she tried to keep it weighted and not move it. God forbid another fall on that same right one. Where the cab drivers were always shy. This time there were only 2 cars when Diana reached them, and named the village she needed to get to urgently. One driver refused flatly. "What's wrong with you, girl? I don't even know how to drive people around town, and you're going all the way out here." The roads there are like glass now. The second cab driver quoted a price that was exactly the amount of money Diana had in her purse for the return trip, which she would have to borrow from her father. But Diana was still tearfully happy, if one can be happy when rushing to her mother's funeral. "Please," she begged. "Let's try to drive." The boy signaled to get into the car. Diana grasped the handle with her right hand out of habit and cried out in pain. "What's wrong?" "I fell unluckily." She grimaced, trying to hide the pain. Diana somehow got comfortable on the seat. When the cab driver turned around and asked, "Did you break your arm?" "No, I guess not," she replied. "I wouldn't have been able to move my fingers then." "That's not necessary. Give me the right one." Diana held out her hand, and he quickly, skillfully felt it, almost without pain. "Let's go to the trauma center for an X-ray," he said firmly. "No," Diana almost shrieked. She didn't have the money to make another detour to the hospital. Yes, there would probably be a line there. One thing she needed right now was to get to her mom and dad. "You're not a doctor," she said. "How do you know?" "Actually, I work in the Ministry of Emergency Situations," the cab driver admitted. "I know how to give first aid too, and I don't like your hand." Diana was so exhausted, so overexcited that she told this stranger everything, and that she was in a hurry to go to her mother's funeral, and that the most important thing for her now was to get there. And there's nothing to do in the village. They'll have to help her with some other bandages, and they'll do some light work. She was so worried that she didn't notice where they were going. And then she realized it when she saw the car pulling into the town. "I don't have any extra money, I told you." There was desperation in her voice. "I'm asking you for money." The cab driver didn't even turn around. "Do you have your passport?" "Of course I do." Or they might ask her if she had a passport. He drove her not to the traumatology department, but to the largest surgical building, where he said he had his own people. And indeed, he soon came back for her and led her through the corridors to the X-ray room, where an older lab technician quickly took pictures. She also asked Diana for her passport and policy. The latter, of course, she didn't have on her. A companion. Diana took the still wet scans and quickly walked down the corridor. Came back in about 10 minutes. 3 doctors told me that there is a fracture, he reported. "They're going to put a cast on you now. No need." "I know where I'm going. There's so much to do. There's a canvas. No bandage. I don't mind. Andrew will do it now." Half an hour later, the car was once more carefully making its way through the merging streets. And Diana's companion, whose name was Nick, said, "Just be careful with that arm. At least for a month until the bones start to stick together. Thank you." They'd made a subtle switch to you, and for asking for the painkiller shot for me. Thank you. Something cold to put on at night. Pain and poetry. The car was warm, and Diana didn't notice herself dozing off. It was as if she had been released for a short time. The anguish and mental and physical pain were gone, and Diana slept so soundly and so vividly as she had when she was a child. She awoke when Nick gently rubbed her shoulder. The car was parked at the entrance to her village. Where to next? Oops, Diana perked up, stroked her hair to the end of the street. I'll show you the rest. She saw from afar that the gate of her house was open. People were coming out. Until then, she hadn't fully believed her mom was gone. But now she understood everything her father had said. Did she? There was the coffin lid standing sent against the wall. Diana cried. Thank you so much. She unzipped her purse, took out her wallet, and shoveled all the money out of it. Fuck you, Nick said. I mean, that's not what I meant to say, you hang in there. I'm gonna give you my cell phone now, so you can tell me when to pick you up. Thank you. Diana got out of the car carefully and staggered toward the house. She had never cried as much as she had in those moments when she had clung to her father. And he cried with her too. He had never thought that Anna, whom he had treated all his life not only as his wife, but also as his child, would be the first to leave. And he, the old man, would be left to live. Diana only hastily hugged her brothers, noting with an edge of consciousness how they had grown up. The house was bustling. There were no ritual agencies here, and as in earlier years, they were preparing to see the deceased out of the house. And the tables for the wake were set in the school canteen. The whole village wanted to say goodbye to their teacher. There just wasn't enough room at home. William and Diana stayed up at night, sitting in the big room. Anna's face was as calm as a sleeper's, and it was as if she was present for the third time. She knew your life was hard, William said, that you were keeping her safe, not telling everything. But she felt everything and took it very personally. Daddy, you don't mean to say that she got worse, that her illness worsened because of me. Not my daughter. She was just hiding it from all of us. I guess it's a family thing, sharing the good things. And the bad things you have to go through alone. It's not right. Maybe someone close to her would have helped. Yeah, well, that's the way it is now. The action's over. Diana's arm ached terribly, but she was crying because of another pain. Will you come back to us? William asked. I don't know, faintly answered Diana. Mama would love to have you back in the house. David is getting married too. David, as tired as Diana was, she still couldn't help but wonder about the eldest of the brothers. She still considered the child. But what can you take from that brat? Who was Nancy on, remember? Here too, Diana was at a loss for words. Nancy's mother was the most scandalous woman in the village, and she had many children. How many nerves did she get on the nerves of teachers who were supposedly prejudiced against her children? And Nancy, the troublemaker who no one of her peers wanted to be friends with. Anything out of line, she threatened to complain to her mother. And then Helen came to school and organized another showdown, bringing to tears both children and even teachers. One of the young teachers, who had the honor of teaching Nancy, quit when she couldn't take it anymore. Helen called her every night and pissed her off. It's a good thing it was only figurative. She could have meant it literally. He's out of his mind. Diana asked, referring to her brother. I'm telling you, he's a knob, and Nancy's pregnant. That was a judgment. Try not to get married around here. The eldest daughter's gonna take off and dance on the ashes. They've been saying for years she was out of her mind. Mom knew about it. Of course she did, William sighed. She said, let the young ones live with us. We don't have to go to that close-knit woman's house, only before dawn, when there was no more strength to speak or cry. Diana quietly fell asleep on the sofa. Left for a couple of hours, managed to feed. It gave her the strength to get through the next day. At the funeral and wake, almost all the women cried. Anna was loved here, but Diana remembered what someone had said. Poor thing. So from the very beginning her life had not worked out, that her youth had been broken by those scoundrels, that God had given her a short life, and that she had no grandchildren. Diana realized that people have not forgotten anything, and the story of her mother will be passed on from generation to generation, and they will talk about her themselves. And this very Dinka was born from whom of that trio, who knows who, that they mocked her. Diana went to her native house, not knowing how long she would stay there. But the very next day after the funeral, she noticed that Nancy had practically moved in with them. Where would she live now? One room was occupied by the young people, and the second room was occupied by Ben's father and younger brother. Diana was left with the largest passageway room where she would always be in plain sight. Nancy did not hide her pregnancy. Every now and then she emphasized that this she could eat, and that she had no money anymore. It seemed that wherever she went, everywhere she went, she bumped into Nancy. "Are you staying until 9 days?" Nancy asked Diana. "Maybe longer. You're married, aren't you? Or are you just living with someone?" Diana was used to such impudent questions. She didn't feel well. Her arm was always in sharp pain. She was sleepy and had no appetite. To top it all off, after watching Nancy and comparing some facts, Diana bought a test at the optical kiosk that had recently opened in the village. She realized that she was expecting a baby too. Everyone in the house was already asleep, but she sat on the sofa and did not move, staring at one point as if thinking about something. And then she erased Nick's number from her phone. Who was he? A casual acquaintance. Thank him so much for all the good he'd done her. But she can't owe him too much. Diana owed him nothing. When 9 days had passed, at dinner, trying not to wrinkle her nose at the smell of herring, Diana said, "Tomorrow I am leaving." She heard Nancy sigh with relief. Her father was genuinely saddened. "But why don't you want to stay?" Diana had to remind herself to pull herself together. "I have my own family, Dad," she said softly. "I can't leave it." Thomas is waiting, worried. In her heart, though, she trembled. They, knowing that they will meet her at home. Her husband will do nothing to please her again. I guess that's what we should do, contact his parents. Maybe they'll do something to appease their son, or maybe she can stay with them until the baby's born. She had an address for her father-in-law and mother-in-law somewhere. She remembered that they were very sorry that Diana had lost the baby. Let them help keep it, and maybe even raise it. At dawn, when Diana was getting ready, trying not to wake anyone, the first bus was leaving at 600 am. Her father came out into the kitchen and handed her a bank card. "What is this?" asked Diana with surprise. "Did your mother save it for you? It's kind of like her inheritance. No one but me and her knew about the money. You see how it's all working out. Young people are gonna take over the house now. I know you won't take a penny from this place. Well, at least don't give it up. Take the single and it'll be easier for your mom where she is now." Did it take much for Diana to cry like a little girl again? "Come on, I'll walk you out." Her father picked up her bag. God knows when we'll see each other again, and if we'll see each other at all. When Diana returned to her husband, it was noticeable that the tragic event in the family had taken its toll on her. She became very silent and quiet on her mother's dime. She finished a hairdressing course and put the rest of the money into an account. If before, when her husband attacked her, she tried to defend herself, to fight back, now she avoided all confrontations. She did not talk to Thomas herself, but only answered his questions and tried to gain experience. She wrote an ad that a novice master goes to pensioners at home, cuts and does styling for free. She began to have her own clientele. At home, Diana moved like a shadow. Sometimes Thomas forgot she was even there. He would see his wife sitting at home in a corner sewing something. But the young woman couldn't help thinking about what would happen when the baby was born. She remembered how noisy and quiet her younger brothers had been as babies. Would Thomas freak out if the baby wouldn't let him sleep on the rest of the money she had? It would be possible to rent an apartment and live. But Diana had a reason for not touching that amount. As the doctor had said, her pregnancy was going smoothly, and Thomas was behaving more or less tolerably well. Except sometimes he'd push her aside if she was in the way, or slap her on the back, as if in jest. Diana had mentioned this to one of her clients, an old woman from the 3rd floor. Aunt Anna and unexpectedly heard from her a woman who lets her hand be raised. She had to be beaten 3 times a day in the morning, at lunch, and in the evening to make her realize that such an attitude could not be tolerated. When her due date approached, Diana asked the doctor to put her in the hospital in advance. He agreed. It was just a vacation, spending time with the girls in the room, listening to their stories, napping when she wanted to, and eating. 3 times a day, 3 days after Diana was admitted to the hospital, son Mike was born. And if before Thomas did not visit his wife discourages with the fact that he has no time, their doctors, They will do everything that is necessary, but now, after the birth of the heir, he began to come and even brought money. He bought expensive ham juices at the store. At his stinginess, it was a clear indication of good treatment. Now nights, Diana pondered what made her husband the way he was. Maybe his parents had saved every dollar, and often she thought of Nick, someone she never thought could be cruel. Lucky for the girl who would be his wife. When Diana was discharged, she saw that her husband had prepared nothing for the baby. Before the birth, she had not agreed with him on the subject, fearing another scandal. But now she dared to ask the question a crib stroller. She listed the essentials, fearing that any increase in costs would cause an explosion of anger. But Thomas behaved in an unexpectedly peaceful manner. He slapped his palm on his forehead. Ew, it slipped my mind. Let's go buy it. What about it? Who are we going to leave him for? Diana nodded at Mike, whom she had put on the sofa. You're right. All right, write me a list of things to take. The rest of the day passed quietly. Thomas brought both the crib and the bathtub. About the stroller, he said that a friend had promised to give him an almost new one. The baby had grown up in their family. Diana cooked dinner, and she even had a thought that it might be possible to rebuild the family. One brick at a time. Such peaceful evenings would make a life. But at night, Mike began to cry and could not calm down. Diana carried him in her arms. She was still very weak. She was desperate for sleep after the birth. But she could see that her husband was not happy. Demonstrably turning over from side to side, trying to cover his pillow and his head. Listen, go out with him. Finally, Thomas couldn't take it anymore. Diana looked around confused. Oh, where? In a one-room apartment, even if they hide in the bathroom or the kitchen, the baby's cries would be audible. Go to the stairwell. It's cold there. Diana couldn't take it. And the neighbors will start asking what's wrong. Do you care if the neighbors get a good night's sleep? Or I have to work tomorrow, by the way. His yelling is giving me a headache. I'll be on my feet all day tomorrow, too. Diana tried to talk some sense into her husband. It's a time like this, you have to be patient for a few weeks. Then the little one will sleep better. For a few weeks, Thomas pulled his eyes out. And how do you envision it? I'll be like a zombie coming to work. You're at home. You're home. You can go to bed when you want. I doubt I'll be able to lie down tomorrow and sit with the baby all day. That's work too. Oh, don't give me a responsibility to people. Don't compare. Mike, sensing the tension in the air, shouted especially loudly. And Thomas had gotten up to shut him up, or did I shut him up myself? Diana was all too aware of what might come next. She instantly snuggled the child into the blanket and sprinted out onto the stairs, forgetting to dress herself. The young woman was well aware that the baby's crying would wake the tenants, so she went downstairs and walked in the yard for about an hour. Before the baby fell asleep, I froze myself, but going up to the apartment was scarier. Only in the middle of the night did she carefully put Mike in his crib. Thomas had long since fallen asleep. Diana lay down on the edge of the sofa, but she could not sleep. What to do with despair? It would only get worse, she thought. A couple of days later, her father-in-law and mother-in-law came to see her grandson. They were simple village people. Diana felt that they treated her well, and they liked the baby very much. Lucy, Aunt Lucy sighed, swaying. Mike sighed pitifully. We'll go away and not see him grow up. How about we stay with you for a while, Diana pleaded. The son is too young. He keeps Thomas awake. He's angry. How angry the mother-in-law looked at Thomas, perplexed that the baby was crying. It's a common thing. He'll stop crying. He cries half the night. Thomas said glumly, I'm already walking around like a zombie. Ed, Aunt Lucy's voice had an unaccustomed reproachfulness. From spoiling you, wife, is money hard with you, not the other way around. Try to please someone like that. Come with us, my daughter. True, we don't have special conditions. But we raised our own and will raise yours somehow. Uncle Stephen nodded in agreement. When the parents began to pack for the road, Diana quickly packed her few things. Don't take it from here. Uncle Stephen advised a lot. I'll give the bear a lead. He did not fail. The old people's cottage was small, but Diana was warmly welcomed. They gave her the bigger, brighter room with the windows facing the street. The same day, Diana was suspended in the corner. There was nothing left to do but lull her son to sleep. Did the fresh country air have an effect, or the fact that the mother had stopped being nervous? But the baby began to cry much less. However, Diana's life was not easy. She grew up in a house where there were conveniences, but here there was no need to think about it. She had to heat the stove and run to the small wooden box to go to the bathroom. The bathhouse was heated once a week, and if it was necessary to wash during a break, a basin and cats would help. Firewood was also saved, and in the morning it was not just fresh in the hut, but even cold. Diana used to take Mike to bed with her. She was afraid that he would not freeze. Thomas, who had rarely come to see his old people before. Now that his wife and son were living here, he didn't show up more often. Taking a vacation from us, Diana joked. But there was bitterness in her tone. But she didn't want to go back to her husband either. Month after month went by, and she still lived in that little house. The news from her family was not good. Dad had a stroke. The loss of his wife was not in vain. The doctors were reassuring with good care. William would live and maybe even recover. But would he have that good care? David married Nancy. She gave birth to a daughter, and they all lived in their parents' house. Not only that, but Nancy's mother had moved in, the scandalous Helen, allegedly to look after the sick. But Diana highly doubted that was the case. It was just that the house was just like Aunt Lucy's, and the woman wanted to move to better conditions and to feel like a hostess. Diana's younger brother could not stand such a neighborhood and left school and entered an agricultural college with a dormitory. Diana realized that she could not live in the same house with Nancy and her mother. By nature, she was not capable of scandals. But these two women would make her a paradise. They don't care why Diana and Thomas live apart. Rumors will spread throughout the village that poor Anna's daughter has gone down a bad path and given birth to a child. God knows who, the apple of the tree, and so on and so forth. Sometimes it's the smallest thing that can bring you out of your days. One morning, Diana was cleaning the house, lost the mirror, and suddenly looked at herself with strange eyes. Painfully thin, cheeks sunken, hair hanging in icicles, a dirty stain on her cheek. The day before, the electricity had been cut off. It happened a lot in the village, and I had to cook not on the electric stove, but in the oven. And my head hasn't been fussy for a week. Old things are a pitiful sight. If I live like this, soon I'll get to the point where I'll start giving change near the church. Diana thought with despair, but soon anger joined the despair. She had to do something to fight. She called a girl she had been friends with before. "Helen, help me out. Can you find me a cheaper place to rent?" And yes, Mike might need a babysitter for a few hours a day. To her surprise, her friend was able to arrange both. The very next day, she reported that her neighbor a floor below worked up north and would be happy to have the apartment forewarned and pay the utilities. About the babysitter, Helen was also reassuring. She has a Betty acquaintance who will not refuse to help. The girl is very shallow after school, could not get anywhere. I mean, she started and dropped out. She's just looking for such a job as a nanny and takes cheap. But dead or gone. Thought Diana, it is scary to start in an unknown voyage, but only in the swamp to drown even scarier. She said goodbye to her mother-in-law and mother-in-law very warmly. They had sheltered her in such a difficult time. They had shared everything they had for her and her grandson. Thanks to this respite, Diana came to her senses, and now she has the strength to move on. She owes them a great debt of gratitude and will try to repay them one day. Diana felt an unusual sense of lightness. As she closed the door of the city apartment behind her, it was up to her now, and it was much easier to rely on someone who was not trustworthy to Thomas. She didn't announce her arrival. The next day, she called the city's hairdressing salons and wrote down a few addresses. She was invited for an interview. Diana was afraid she wouldn't be taken anywhere, but she was wrong. She was offered two options, one closer to home, but one with a higher salary. After talking to Betty and making sure she could trust her, Diana chose the higher wage. It wasn't easy, but it was nothing compared to her previous situation. Diana tried to be as responsible as possible at work, and the landlady was pleased with her. Diana went home from work to take over Betty's duties. but the girl often stayed over late. They would have dinner together and talk about life. So Diana had a new friend. Betty really wasn't distant. But as far as housework was concerned, she had all the arguments, and Diana was glad. Back in the warm, cozy house, Betty was not lazy to clean up and cook. Mike sleeps late. She waved her off when Diana began to thank her. What else am I supposed to do? Not read books. The landlady had a good library, but Betty couldn't think of reading without horror. She would turn on the TV, find a show, and start vacuuming. Diana tried to compensate for her hard work, her assistant with money, and both were satisfied. William was slowly recovering from his stroke, getting back on his feet. Helen, who was not friendly to everyone and scandalous, became attached to him and took care of him, albeit roughly, but diligently. When Diana called her brother, he reported that her father was doing well. Diana did not think about such a thing as a private life. Enough. She had more than enough of her marriage. Thomas learned from her parents that Diana and her son had moved to the city. But the old people couldn't say where. Diana hadn't left them an address. She assumed that the house was someone else's, and she had no right to invite anyone here. But Thomas didn't make much of an effort to find them. It was as if he thought they would have to show up themselves. Diana, for her part, decided that if her husband asked for a divorce, she would give it to him the second he asked. Let another woman suffer with it if she wanted to in a year. Diana had so much experience in the hairdresser's shop, such ability and tact with her customers, that the landlady did not hesitate to entrust her with the most capricious and wealthy clients. And all went away satisfied. And then the young woman withdrew the rest of the money from the book, added to them those that she had saved and rented a room. Now she was her own landlady, and again she had to value every penny, because soon the owner of the apartment would return from the north, which meant that Diana would have to look for a place to live. Moore is only a full member of the family. Sometimes Helen's friend, Diana, feels that the incomplete one is her, and she can eat the day before yesterday's beans and soup, or just drink tea with bread and butter more. A meal without his favorite baked pate just won't comprehend. He will look with a look that Helen calls eat yourself, and squeamishly emphasizing pause, will move away from the bag of warm milk or whatever, something that cats are supposed to eat. Will step back and sit down and irritably start licking his shiny black fur to all species, showing, "Not for long. It won't take long for me to stay this pretty with all that vile food." If Helen sleeps just in bed, the Merlot exclusively on the pillow pays for this pleasure, with a voice ringing with a distinct every endless, "Enjoy yourself," the best song for falling asleep. Especially if outside the window blizzard and wind, the glass thickly covered us with snow, and the cat sings and sings in your ear, and the hand sews and stretches from the warmth of the blanket to the living warmth of this cat's body. During an unsuccessful jump on books and newspapers, Curious wandering around the kitchen table chewed the cord from the computer. Your Balsam, whose potty has been turned into a cat box. At first, the Morlot would flee the scene, looking around thievingly. Later, he just squints condescendingly when Helen took him in her arms to pet him again. Well, I'll be patient. But when a stranger appeared in their home, which the cat considered his domain, the baby's wary frozen posture showed Helen that the cat was more anxious than ever in his life. She wanted habitually to pick him up, but the cat, like a small black panther with the untrustworthiness of a wild animal, darted under the sofa and disappeared there for a long time. He appeared late in the evening, without waiting for the guests to leave, and with the same graceful, loving-to-the-floor movements, began to make his way to his bowl. But the cat did not give in and, having gone, again disappeared into the dark corners of the apartment. The guest remained to live in them. Maybe he was not a bad person, but he thought that a cat should be a cat and eat everything out of a bowl. God forbid, to come to the table, to beg and liver is for humans. And the stomach, so what is easier to sleep? At best in the chair and in the wrong place. And a stiff male hand literally sweeps the baby to the floor from hiding. At first resentful, he got wilder and wilder every day. Already he did not come to the kitty got out at the call from somewhere from under the bathtub, and absolutely refused to drink. even if there was only Helen in the house and you couldn't see him from under the bathtub. Or maybe it just wasn't interesting that Helen didn't differ much from his behavior. She used to lie on her bed in the evenings with a book. Now she sits in the kitchen with the new man in the room watching TV. Helen puts the food in 2 bowls, takes it to the man, puts it on the floor for the cat, and sits on the stool again, looks over the book, and looks into the room. He comes back very late, before he and the cat had their 7th dream at this time. Now the man only turns off the TV at this time. One day there was a noise at home, to such a noise that the Mushalo decided not otherwise. Renovations are starting. It's a scary business. God forbid any cat should have to endure it. He crawled deep under the bathtub, under the wet cold pipe, and waited. And then the house became quiet. Moore couldn't believe the silence and stayed in his hiding place, until familiar knees crouched in front of the tub and a hand reached out to him into the dark depths. That night he slept in his accustomed place on his pillow. Only restless was he when his fur became quite wet and not at all laundered. He shook himself unhappily, got free, and moved to the chair. But his mistress got up and carried him over to her again, and jabbed his face into it. The cat relented and dragged out his eternal meow. For a while, engrossed in his affair, Helen withdrew from Diana. But when, after a grand scandal, she broke up with her boyfriend, she reached out to her friend again. In Helen's horoscope, apparently it was a given from above. If usually her life flowed smoothly, then on the holidays invariably came some kind of nastiness. This time it was the flu. Actually, maybe she wouldn't have gotten sick if she hadn't gone to get a gift for Diana in the store pandemonium, barely managed to squeeze through the crowd, hold out my hand with the money, and quite the acrobatic trick of crawling back out, clutching the change, purse, and box of crystal writing utensils to her chest. The trio must have been gone for an hour when the bus finally pulled up, and the assembled people amicably rushed to take it by storm. Helen realized it was necessary to walk, so she walked straight along the road. She wanted to hiss like a cat that had been pissed off. Damn it, it's March 8th. It's like a litmus test. If a woman buys her own flowers on that day, you put a sign on her. Lonely, which in our country, unlike the enlightened West, is equivalent to unhappy. Therefore, all women's novels in colorful covers about how this is such a no one needs a gray mouse suddenly falls right on his head a beautiful prince. As in real life, there are not in life for one bachelor of 40 years there are 4 unmarried ladies. The spirits in envy bent the brakes, and Helen swerved to the right. The generation fell into the wet snow. As got out on the spot on dry land, took off and shook the snow mush out of her boots, and then poured home this poem. The next day she woke up and immediately realized the fever was high. Cold under the blanket, throat burning, as if our house had been driven on it. Nose swollen in half. The most March 8th kind. Gotta crawl to the drugstore. The closest one to her house was the new one. Usually Helen loved it, bang for the Euro trim, and a selection like nowhere else. But right now the white color was cutting her eyes and making it hard to focus. Immersed in her musings, she sneezed all over the pharmacy. The man ahead of her turned around. Helen had no doubt that now he was about to hear a threatening monologue on the subject that there was nothing in such a state to go around the city and infect people. Instead, he said, "Don't take all that stuff. It won't work." "What will?" Helen looked up at him with watching eyes. She was barely on her feet. The man took her under his elbow and led her outside. "Is there any whiskey at home?" he asked. She immediately imagined an alcoholic who had decided to make a profit at her expense. True, he didn't look like an alcoholic, but who knows? Or maybe I have a husband at home. He chuckled. If you have a husband, you don't go to drugstores in such a state. The circumstances became clearer only when they went upstairs to her room, and he first of all began to fill the bathtub with almost boiling water, and then poured a packet of salt into it. I've flown north before. Frost under -50. That's the norm up there. And if someone fell down, we treated him. So put your feet up here and tell me where's the alcohol. Such a potion made Helen drop like a mouse. She lay in bed, tangled in the blankets, and felt the sickness receding. She was terribly sleepy. She woke up when it was getting dark. It was snowing outside the window. Helen didn't realize whether it was morning or evening. And what time of year? She thought it was winter. Large white flakes flickered in the gap between the curtains. Then she smelled a cotton candy odor. It was connected to one once at school. The boys had thrown together and bought all the girls in the class a flower for March 8. It came up next to her hand, still clutching the handkerchief. A mimosa lay there, and the kitchen smelled of freshly roasted coffee. Now in the mornings, as Diana got ready for work, she saw a different person in the mirror. There was nothing left of the intimidated and harassed young woman who belonged in some orphanage for the poor. She still spent her money sparingly on herself, but she looked quite dignified. Diana's usual clothes were jeans and a light breeze. Her hair she shot short, and unknown why it started to slightly curl. Slim, trim, with a good figure and light, tasteful makeup. Diana made a good impression, but it was her eyes that changed the most. The look became detached and rigid. It was clear that such a lady would not be easy to fool, and she would not be able to sit on her neck. Diana sometimes thought aloofly that not so long ago she would have behaved very differently. So the other day she stopped by a convenience store to buy something for dinner and picked out some nuggets that Mike loved. The clerk bagged a dozen and put the pancakes on the scale. Diana reached for the bag. Immediately, the clerk slapped her lightly on the arm. "Don't take it off the scale." "I haven't counted it yet." The old Diana smiled guiltily and spoke. Yes, of course. I'm sorry," the current Diana looked coldly. "I understand the words 'I don't have to be beaten.' Treat your customers better, or will you be kicked out of this place?" Then she turned around and walked out of the store. She bought her groceries elsewhere. She solved the housing issue in her own way. She took out a small loan and bought a room in a former hostel. She liked this Stalinist building very much. The two wings were connected by the 6-coal tower, and there were rooms in the tower, and Diana had one of them. The previous owner loved his dwelling and made it into a mini apartment with a tiny kitchen and a knot. It was Diana and Mike's first place of their own, and they both loved it. So many windows during the day, the sun went from one to the other, and Mike, who didn't like the dark, was provided with light until the evening. Diana paid off the loan in 2 years, and then started thinking about selling the room, taking out more loans and buying a 1-bedroom. Or what the hell is not kidding, even a 2-room apartment. But procrastinated. She really liked this house in the center of the city and the top floor of the tower. The only thing higher was the sky. And her hairdressing salon, on the other hand, was in the basement. But everything suited Diana, so it was warm and cozy. The ladies were waiting for their turn. On a soft sofa covered with fox fur, they admired the big, beautiful aquarium, leafed through magazines and drank coffee. But even more often chatted with Diana. Everyone easily found a common language, and the small basement soon turned into a real women's club. Diana had become a real stylist. She almost always found something to advise her clients, prompted them, and when they agreed with her. The result was so stunning that the ladies left in admiration. And when Diana was at home, the phone rang every now and then. Somebody asked for a haircut or a styling appointment. In short, things were picking up. The circle of acquaintances has expanded dramatically, but real under the hand of Diana, at that time there were only 2. Helen, who finally married well, but always found time to drop in once a week for a coffee. Both young women had been through a streak of hardship, and their lives had hardened them. They could be proud of it, but continued to be a support for each other. The second friend was Betty, their son's nanny. Diana's example affected her as well. She began to transform from the formerly shy girl with a learning disability into a relieved person. It turned out that Betty was very much beckoned by traveling. But since she had neither the means nor the ability to travel to distant lands, she pursued local history. She was also going to eventually be hired at the town library, and she was waiting for a place. As for Diana's relatives, things were different here. Her father was slowly recovering and the family was living together. Even Helen had lost some of her bad temper. Diana's younger brother was finishing his studies and was getting married. Diana liked his fiancée, and she was calm for her family. As for her ex-husband, Diana grinned involuntarily. Remembering the law of boomerangs, they were officially divorced, and Thomas now had to pay alimony. What was the big nuisance? He tried to argue in court that he was getting the bare minimum of a living wage. Where else was there to support a child? But even the judge awarded it, reminding him that it is unworthy of a man to shift all the responsibilities of supporting his son onto the shoulders of his wife. Then Thomas demanded from Diana that all the alimony, which she will transfer, she will not spend. Put it on the book. Otherwise, I know you. You blow all your money on bullshit. And I want all the money to go to Mike. Diana squinted her eyes. She looked at her ex-husband for a few moments, and then with a few words she outlined to him the route she proposed to take. And for some reason it didn't even occur to Thomas to raise a hand to the young woman, even though he had done it so easily before. Thomas had not yet found a new mate. Women appeared in his life, but none of them stayed for long, notwithstanding his months-long violent nature. When he broke up with another woman, he'd get drunk. And if his drunkenness was particularly cruel, he would go to his parents in the village, where he came to his senses. It was getting harder and harder for him each time. His parents blamed his son for everything that had happened, and repeated that he had ruined his life by breaking up with Diana. His parents blamed their son for everything that had happened, and repeated that he had ruined his life by breaking up with Diana. For her part, the young woman kept in touch with her elders. She knew that she would never forget the kindness they had shown her at the most difficult moment. Now Diana had no need to hide her address, and every few months, the old people would visit their grandson. They brought with them a purse of village gifts. In return, Diana also tried to do something good for her former father-in-law and mother-in-law. She paid for water to be piped into the house. She promised to help with gas in the future. It was tacitly agreed that when Mike grows up a little, he will spend the summer in the village at his grandparents'. Of course, Diana did not save all 3 months of child support to go to the sea with the child once a year. She still hadn't thought about changing her personal life, until a certain point. Diana didn't have many male clients. Usually all her working hours were distributed among women. Even a dense record was formed. You couldn't get to her just like that. Still, a couple of times a day a man came down to the basement and asked if he could get a haircut. Diana worked fast, and if she had free time, she didn't refuse them. But this attractive young man with inviting brown hair seemed familiar to her. But Diana simply invited him to come in and sit in the chair. She knew she had an abysmal memory for faces. She might not recognize even a close acquaintance if she saw him wearing a new jacket and hat, for example. Conversely, she might greet a stranger with a friendly hello, mistaking him for someone she knew. "How shall we meet?" "The usual way?" Diana asked, picking up the scissors. For your tastes, this answer was not uncommon, and the young woman only nodded. And yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she knew this man. Their gazes met in the large mirror, and he asked how your arm had healed. Nick gasped. "She never thought she'd see you again." "And he admitted, "I've been trying to find you. After all, I held your passport in my hands. I knew your name and address." Diana experienced an extraordinary feeling of bliss. He was looking for her. "But this fellow Nick grinned when I came. I told him you didn't live here anymore. I even went to your house in the village, but they didn't give me an address there either. I warned everyone," Diana said. "I didn't want my ex-husband to find me, but I couldn't have predicted that you would come looking for me." They smiled at each other and could not contain their joy. On the stairs leading to the basement, they heard the clatter of heels. Where another customer was taking her time. "I realize it's busy, but maybe we can meet tonight." How Diana would have liked to sit with Nick in a cafe somewhere, to talk, to take her time. But Betty had warned her this morning that she couldn't stay late. "I have to let the babysitter go today," Diana said. But both seemed afraid of losing each other again. And Nick looked up hopefully. "But you can walk me home," she said. "Come by 7 p.m., we'll talk on the way." There was also a change in the life of Betty the nanny, whom Diana had hired for her son, and who over the years had become not only an assistant, but also a close friend. The story happened in the summer when Betty, with her backpack and dogs, went to that backwoods area that borders a nature preserve. It was 11 o'clock in the evening. The light of day had almost faded, and only somewhere at the edge of the sky cast, greenish and transparent for the frogs, came the starry hour. In this little swamp in the deep woods, who were they to fear? And they went all out. No, this trip had been an adventure after all. Betty lay on her belly in her small tent, prepared completely for the night by the light of the lantern's stopped books, and tried her best to inspire herself with the feeling. And Estrin, wood that was very even cozy, as if in a small house. But to think that they're separated only by a cloth, a dense reserved forest. And if anything, they wouldn't find her here forever and ever. The most sensible thing to do was to rely on the dogs. The dogs behaved calmly, not dozing at the entrance to the tent. A German shepherd stretched carefree on its side. So he did not smell any danger at all. A bay lay regal motionless, like a lion guarding and the palace, and were a reliable defense. It is, of course, but to see things through to the end, Betty thought. Or was it so necessary to come here? Betty was an enthusiastic person, and a vacation was not something one could do with a lot of time. Familiar people were already habitually going abroad, expanding their itineraries every year. You again in Egypt, and we with a breath in Paris, and we in Thailand want to get new impressions. Betty has already realized that you can get new impressions anywhere. For example, during last year's accident, which lasted a week in the apartments, it was like -20 degrees outside, so very fingers at the open oven door. She felt like a resident of a besieged city. Traveling with a tent, even simple weekend getaways were a thrill. Now they were actually more likely to go with her friend Helen and stay on the beach. And everywhere else is close to accommodation. But Helen had caught a bad cold. Betty had been planning the trip for so long that she gave up and decided to go alone. Being a local historian, she knew a lot about her homeland. And a rock with a shell imprint found on the shore reminded her that the ocean had once been here. Abandoned villages, temples from centuries past, now beginning to revive the places were favored by artists, from where magnificent panoramas of the Volga, mountains, caves, about which legends are made. But she was especially attracted to things she had read about, but had not yet seen for herself. That was how she learned about this place in the heart of the local mountains, where everything is shrouded in a kind of mysticism. There was talk of a biological defense. Nature kept its secrets from man. Even harmless birds behaved like predators. The face of the mistress of the mountains was said to have been seen here. Betty sipped hot tea from a mug. But isn't man part of nature? Why should one go to war with the likes of her? All the weapons that a penknife and a small hatchet to chop the apprentice. A sudden movement where the dogs lay made Betty flinch. Worry clearly smelling something in the distance a moment. Later, the fog lifted that had so obviously alarmed them. Betty didn't know what she should do. To hug the dogs, to hold them close to her. It seemed safer that way to her. Or walk out of the tent with them. Try to understand why the dogs seemed increasingly agitated. Theoretically, wolves did breed here, but not many, and they always shunned humans. There hadn't been a single attack in years, especially in the summer when the beast was fed. But probably no fools carried here alone, if anything. Han's a wolfhound by nature. He can handle it. And he's got a lot of strength, too. The hounds were already slithering and hacking briefly. No, sitting and waiting was even scarier. Betty picked up the lantern and lifted it from the shelves of the tent. A tiny speck of light and black, such a hostile forest. And seemingly in the distance, a little herd and crunching. Look for it, she waved her hand. The sheepdog tore into the thicket without a second thought, not hesitating in its direction, as if it had been expected. Betty grasped her collar, holding her close to her. Quietly she repeated, trying to hear what was going on out there in the distance behind the barking, finding something. It was definitely not a wolf or another dangerous opponent. The girl knew the nuances of her dog's barking, something from a dog's point of view important, but not threatening. She swore a leash in the form of a con. The most unpleasant thing would be to get ticks or to fall somewhere. Betty tried to illuminate just the ground beneath her feet. But Han dragged her only branches, smacked her in the face with an excited wagging of his tail with a sickle and barking. Barking now in two voices that made her ears pop. Betty raised the flashlight higher and exchanged it for a small semblance of Palanca's. Failing off the floor lay a man. He was conscious, but he was looking at her. Instead, Betty saw that he was badly beaten. The swarthy face, the bruises, his shirt a mess of blood. That pain must have darkened his mind. The dogs realized at once that a man is helpless to fight such a man. But a man is in principle a lord of lords. He must not be allowed to die. That's the way to call for help. That's why they dragged Betty here, eating or now as if asking, "See? See?" Betty was scared out of her mind. An accident. Poacher, criminal altercation. What did she get herself into? They won't rush out. She was quick to say it, as she always said to those who had close encounters with her boys. But this time it was more likely to come out of inertia. The man responded. He gasped and spoke softly. "Please let me if you can, and leave quickly." So he's also tied up. No, nothing good could be expected here. Anything. But it doesn't look like an accident. Betty fumbled in her jeans pocket for a penknife. It was a very small knife, good for cutting bread and sausage, not sawing rope. But if she did manage it, suddenly he'd have her right there. "I won't hurt you." Even more quietly, the man said, "Don't be afraid." Betty unfolded the knife and walked over. She was ashamed of her thoughts, but somehow on the surface. And deep down, fear lived. He shifted heavily from. Opening her back, her hands were tied behind her back and tightened cruelly. The hands were no longer a living color. This is not the way one binds for the purpose of frightening. One binds without caring because soon it will just be a body. "What's wrong?" asked Betty. "Why?" asked Les. "You know?" He took a breath. "I came to a friend's house for a master class with the students. So in front of us lies a man of intelligence. The martial arts of jiu-jitsu. I gave a master class, watched the guys. And then the pause was longer. Speech was confused as well as breathing. We sat in a cafe in the hotel. 2 men attached themselves to us. We didn't want to get involved for a long time. They started. Then we put them down. I don't know who. Maybe you're tough guys. I don't remember the night in the room. Woke up in the car with my hands tied. They brought me back, beat me up, and told me they'd give me 2 hours. Then they'll start the hunt. They said no one would find it here." Everything that could have followed was in Betty's mind in 1 minute. Of course, he couldn't get far in his condition. Hunting with dogs for poison. Witnesses are impossible here. People are inventoried here every 3 years. Her tent is next door. And of course, she won't be left alive. Legs, arms, ribs intact. Quickly asked the girl and burst his arm. "Let's run." All bodily pains were to be put aside for later. "We'll sort it out afterwards. If we stay alive." Home, she told the dogs. She dragged him to the tent, and the dogs raced ahead. He followed her hard, but he made it through the bushes. So should we walk after all? No, she'd probably drag him. There was a force in her that wasn't hers. She was being carried. What time was that? 1 hour and 15 minutes. Betty was holding the lantern in the same hand that the clock was nodding off on. "We still have 40 minutes. Just go." He tried to almost compel her with every syllable. "No, leave me alone. The commissioner won't be here." For what? Both of them campaigning? Cheers. Tent Betty slipped inside, grabbed the nearly empty backpack. What's important now? There'd be time to roll up here, but there isn't. There's only one way through the forest down to the Volga. There's one place to hide. Not much hope, but there's nothing else to do. Will they find the trails right away? No. Only one direction down the mountainside. That old pine needles are like soap. The man may have diverged a little, but now they were running almost side by side. There's a ravine coming up. There's roots from under the ground. Grab from behind them. Betty recognized the spot where she had climbed this morning. There's the pine tree. Some of the roots sticking out selectively as if from someone's feet. And there's a darkening ravine, 2 meters into it just to jump. The walls are almost responsible, but by catching on the roots you can throw your body over. There was no need for the dogs. They went down and into the forest, and were waiting for them already on the other side. It was much brighter on the bank of the Volga, a clear moonlit night, and the surface of the water mirrored not black, the gray sky from the multitude of stars. Into the water. Betty forced herself not to scream. Who knows where they are now? But her whisper sounded like a shout all across the water to the trail of dogs sure to rush after her. When there was something unusual, they always stayed close. And this wasn't just an unusual menace. It's time to look around. Where the enemy is, who to tear up? What's the bottom here? In this country, there are pools, steep cliffs, and currents, where those who drowned were not found immediately. Sometimes months later, they didn't feel the cold, the water. Betty looked back to the shore. Where is it? There's a rock protruding like the white horn and a birch tree above it. Is there a cave there rather? They'd found it with Helen once. It's not an object, just a hollow in the rock. It was uncomfortable to sleep in. The entrance was blocked with rocks. But it was cool during the day, and they spent a few hours escaping the heat and marked the cave in their memory. Besides, the place was inconspicuous. If you looked from the riverside, a rock-like cliff obscured the entrance. Betty wasn't expecting it, but the man, realizing where they needed to go, climbed up first to pull her by the hand. Time. 3:30. She didn't continue. Clear as it was. The hunt is already underway. Now it is necessary that not a single sound be made, lest the dogs of the hall discover themselves and at the sight of strangers. Silence, silence. Almost with her lips, Betty repeated. The dogs were still lying quietly at her feet. They would probably only reach the river if they lost the trail. Some more time had passed. Now only the rumor of the glint of an occasional wave, the cry of a bird, and somewhere still very far away voices lived. The man quickly fumbled for his backpack and took out an axe from it. With his free hand, he pushed Betty farther into the cave and pressed her to the ground. It won't help, she whispered about the hatchet. I'll stop one of them. How many are 4? He whispered. But if they come up by there, you hear do not call. That is quiet. The distant gleam of water and someone else's speech. Silence. They heard nothing more. What if these ones went the other way? If you break now and more often right at the entrance to the cave, the dogs will intervene. But suddenly Betty's weapons lay on the rocks, stabbed in the head in his hand. With all my might, I wish I could not be. It was dawning quietly, he said. The sky was already dark blue. It was a reminder of the need to hold out against the evil force until the roosters were gone. Soon the first meteor of the boat would go. It would hardly be safe to hunt people. Khan crawled to come warmly sideways again. This, too, was sitting up. Now here leaning against the rocks. Didn't look like a partisan. Laying down before throwing a grenade. What's your name? Martin. And you, Betty, Svetlana, more and more clearly. Betty raised her head, finding herself dozing off. It probably hadn't lasted long at all. It was light, but it was still early morning, the water divided by liquid silver and the red glare of the rising sun. The dogs doused her from all sides, warming her and delighting in letting their mistresses lay almost on top of her head. This brief rest only made her realize how sore her muscles were. What a heavy head on the neck. Martin quite seemed to be awake. He was also sitting against the wall, guarding the recently redundant view. It was now, of course. But let me see you, Betty said. He covered her hand. You don't have to. I've done a lot worse. But what you did, just don't get on your knees. Let's get out of here. The shore further on is bad, rocky and narrow. And then it won't be Zina, and there's a forest ranger. I wrote about that forester. He knows me only the road. There's a dirt road. No car. The car there from the national park comes rarely. There are horses. But she thought he smiled in the semi-darkness. I can do that. Then let's go. They made their way along the riverbank, resembling the most careless tourists who had lost their backpacks, who had gotten lost, and whom the local places were catching up with to the fullest extent. At any rate, the forester Anthony was startled when the scratched and shot girl, whom he knew well, appeared before him. Nevertheless, it took a long time to convince him that it was not a drunken delusion and not tales of the Vienna forest. There was no need. There had been riots and drownings, and he tried not to mess with the scumbags from out of town. So I figure you get on horseback to the highway that goes to town. You go home, that's Betty. You catch the trucker. I don't know who the hell's picking on you. I'm not risking a train now. Betty shook his head. Anthony, the only thing I'm afraid of is horses. No way I'm going. What are we going to do with you? Will you radio for someone to come get me later? I'm in no hurry. Her fear came from an incident from time immemorial, when in the park on the 5-year-old Mike horse blew away, threw off, not wanting anything bad. And that sense of power still inspired terror in the girl. Martin took the bridle as something native and not a foot in the stirrup. He was on his horse in one stride. Betty no, she even backed off, but he overreached with me. He held out his hands, palms up. I'm not going. There's the hedgehog, the forester said without rancor. Your shaggy fools are even scarier. They have teeth, and the horse is old. Oh, she's not going to drop the kids. Go on, I'll get out of here. I'm not saying goodbye, Martin said. Betty sat upright on the grass, wrapped her arms around her knees, and listened, quickly moving away all the stomping of hooves. The dry sounds resembled gunshots. She cried quietly. Tomorrow I'll write a letter to my mother. I'm living well until they shoot me. Wouldn't you like a thrill? You say? Con rode around the ground with keen interest. He must have smelled a mouse or a lizard. Betty took a long time to recover from the adventure, but Martin found her. She had traveled to see him, and now the relationship was growing stronger. Martin was already bored and calling to move soon. In the fall, they were to get married. For Mike's birthday, the young women decided to have some sort of a birthday dinner. Betty did the cleaning. Helen also came in advance with large packages. In addition to the gift for the birthday boy, there was something else for the festive table, because on the tiny loaf, actually, the cubbyhole is fenced off by a closet. You can't really sort it out. But of course, the cake was already showing off on the table. One of Diana's clients was a pastry chef and now surpassed herself. Prepare a work of pastry art. A chocolate bear sat on top in a forest clearing, and a little boy kept his admiring eyes on it. He knew it was forbidden to touch the cake, but he couldn't leave the table to contemplate his sweet treasure. Helen was finishing hanging the balloons. Is our mom running late? Yes, Mike, she said, tying the biggest balloon on the string. Mommy's working, said the boy. It's a good thing we don't have a hot meal planned. We have to heat it up. She promised we'd be at the table at 8:30. But she's got her hair salon open till the last customer. Betty was putting sandwiches on a plate. She said worriedly, I'm afraid I should probably cover it with cling film. Some cranky client is making her curls redone 20 times, Helen suggested, or tells the story of her family to the 7th knee. Betty chimed in, but David knows how to put them gently in their place. Maybe she stopped by the store. Want to get something else for Mike? Yeah, probably the last thing I'd think a girl would be late for a date. She told me she'd had enough of so-called love and family life, that she'd never do it again. Everyone has their own happiness. Helen jumped off the couch, adjusted the bedspread. You and I have found good men. Does she have a job? Does Mom work? Mike, notwithstanding, slightly touched the Kremlin and roses with his finger, and immediately put his finger in his mouth. Be patient, sunshine. Now we'll sit down at the table. Betty looked into the boy's eyes. Are you hungry? Shall I feed you? Come on, where's Diana? Len, call her. But Helen didn't have time to dial the right number. There were footsteps coming from up here to the top of the tower. There could only be one person in a hurry. At last, Betty hurried to open the door, swung it open, and stepped back in surprise. Behind Diana's shoulder stood a tall young man. Meet Diana stepped to the side to introduce the guest. This is Nick. The friends ought to themselves. Of course, they were aware of that acquaintance story, but they had no doubt that this would be just one of those episodes that would forever be remembered. How did you find each other? But Diana did not respond to Betty's exclamation. She picked up Mike, who was always shy around strangers, and now he was hiding behind her back. And the hero of the evening, please love and applaud. Nick, unknowingly from nowhere, as if out of thin air, took out a people's red car and handed it to the birthday boy. And in a few minutes, everyone was already sitting at the table, pouring champagne. Mike, who went on Nick's lap, did not take his eyes off the gift. He even forgot about the cake, and outside the window the rain was ending. and it looked like a rainbow was about to burst in the sky and start shimmering with different colors.